If you have friends which haven't seen Haikyuu, then you'll likely know the pain of trying to explain to them why some of Haikyuu's best scenes are so good. You and I know how hype, moving, and in some cases, life-changing this series' best scenes can be, but trying to explain to someone why a single receive, block, or spike is so incredibly moving is kinda hard to do. But there's one scene in particular that on my latest rewatch really stood out to me. Somehow, without a single thing happening, just a bit of camera movement and a single line, we get a scene that turned one of the most overlooked characters in the series into one of the greatest of all time. Tadashi Yamaguchi and his success in fighting back against an all too relatable feeling. For the first 2 episodes of Haikyuu, he doesn't really feel like too much more than Tsukishima's sidekick. He even initially brags about Tsukishima's height, seemingly in absence of something to brag about himself. With everything else going on, and the focus really being on the other characters, he kinda slips under the radar a bit for the first half of season 1. And I didn't really think much of him as a result. But there's a scene in episode 14 where he gets his first setup for something down the line. His conversation with Shimada, in which he walks in despite the shop being closed and asks him to teach him how to do a jump float serve, because he never wants to be the only first year on the bench the whole game again. Maybe this won't make sense to some people, but to feel as though you're good enough, that you're not a failure and you can do the same things as everyone else, is a blessing you only really appreciate if you used to not feel that way. And it's also something that absolutely consumes you when you feel as though you're not enough, that you can't do anything right. You can't do the same things as everyone else. Like there's this curse or barrier that just seems to stop you again and again. It's something I so desperately wanted when I was younger, yet saw so many people around me taking it for granted. I don't know how many people will be able to relate to that, but I'm sure we can all at least relate to that frustration of wanting to be better. And the timid, shy Yamaguchi going out of his way to seek out Shimada really says so much about him. And he earned a ton of respect from me in the scene, because it would have been all too easy for him to just kind of resign himself to the sidelines, to say, well, it's rare for first years to play. It's just Hinata, Kageyama, and Tsukishima, all exceptional in some way. Next year I'll be on the team. There wouldn't have been this risk of embarrassment or failure. It would have likely been a very comforting thing to tell himself. And that's the option I took myself for so long. But not only does Yamaguchi actively seek out a way to get what he wants, he goes for being a pinch server, the only play where you're not just standing side by side with your team as equals, you're carrying all the expectations on your back. It really is so admirable. I have a ton of respect for his resolve and initiative. A ton to admit, hey, I'm weak right now and I'll do whatever I can to change that. Can you help me? And so Yamaguchi starts practicing alone at night in a cold, dark parking lot in the hope of that one moment where it all changes for him. Soon enough, Karasuno enters their first regional qualifier, and of course, eventually end up against their biggest rivals, Alba Josai. Jumping ahead to the 3rd set, the momentum is building and building against Karasuno. Oikawa's tactics are breaking them down point by point, and the focus of the game is on the 2 genius setters going against each other at a level way beyond anyone else on that court. Desperate to find a way to shift the momentum back, Coach Ukai does something completely unexpected to everyone, even Yamaguchi's mentor, Shimada. He subs the terrified, shaking Yamaguchi in, and as he steps on the court, he's shocked by how different it is. The intensity and heat of the court gives a very cold reminder. Unfortunately, no matter how much you hype yourself up and play things out in your mind, the second you're confronted with whatever it is you were dreading, your body is going to tense up. You're going to feel nervous and wish you were literally anywhere else. And you've got to be prepared for that. As Yamaguchi tries to calm his nerves, desperate for his one chance to prove himself, to work out, he shakily sends his jump float serve towards Alba Josai, only for it to not even make it over the net. And I don't know about you, but I can think of at least a dozen moments where I felt exactly like Yamaguchi in this scene. Deflated, inferior, as though there's some barrier between him and everyone else. But as he walks off, devastated by what's happened, to the rest of the stadium it's really not a big deal. It was just 1 point, a point that was just used to calm Karasuno down a bit. The next point starts and it's already been forgotten, but to Yamaguchi that was everything. His whole self-worth, his confidence, he put his very soul into that serve, and it didn't work out, so that's that, right? Well, no, of course not. Yamaguchi seemed convinced that's the end of his volleyball chances, but Daichi shows why he's captain as he tells him, "You'll get it next time," which seems to be a huge shock to Yamaguchi. I've always loved the way Haikyuu deals with failure and setback. It's always heartbreaking and painful, but it's never the end, and nor does it ever end up as badly as you'd expect it to. You get way more chances than you realize. And Yamaguchi does get another chance in the rematch of Awa Josai in season 2, but before that he has a talk with his teacher that gives us an unforgettable line. Following their defeat earlier that day, when Shimada asks him, "Did you enjoy it?" he responds with a flat, "Not really," before spilling all his frustrations out. And Shimada's response really stuck with me. To get the most out of sports, you have to be strong. It's not that you have to be the greatest in the world, but being too weak to do anything sucks. It's frustrating and we might not admit it, but none of us want to be the one ranked last. The moment Shimada got his first service ace and realized what he could do, his love of volleyball truly began. In a sentiment that really mirrors Tsukishima's journey, we just need one moment to change the way we see everything. Except, unlike Tsukishima, who struggled to see any meaning or point in striving to be better, Yamaguchi and Shimada were obsessed with wanting to reach the same level as those around them. And what I really love about Yamaguchi's story is it shows this whole idea of talent in such a realistic yet positive light. Sure, he doesn't have the same gifts as Hinata, Kageyama, or Tsukishima. He doesn't really have that innate talent that could help him reach the level of someone like Ushiwaka. But if he practices and puts the work in, he'll be damned good at whatever he practices. I imagine he felt the same thing that I have many times, and maybe you have too, that something is wrong with us. That for one reason or another, we're just never going to get there, wherever there may be. Like there's some invisible wall that just won't let us past. But as Yamaguchi shows, sure, we're not all born the same, but we're not actually as different as we might think. Chances are, if you just keep doing the right things in spite of all those doubts, you will catch them. It's pretty incredible, really, just how much humans can improve at something when they keep at it. In Karasuno's second attempt at qualifying for nationals, in the quarterfinals, they end up against a team we've never seen before, and Yamaguchi gets a chance to serve. He sends the ball up, and it hits the net, causing him to panic. But the point still goes through. He's so needlessly harsh on himself, saying, "Oh, it's a point, but who cares? I just got lucky and I'll miss the next one and I don't want to mess this up." Give yourself some credit, bro. The only person who thought that about his serve was Yamaguchi. Everyone else was excited by the point. He's the only one putting himself down for it. He's being way too hard on himself, seeing his successes as somehow inferior to everyone else's. And that's going to be a major point I'll come back to, thanks to Tsukishima. But before that, Yamaguchi gets a second serve, and all those doubts make him too scared to go for a jump floater. He just stands there and goes for the safe option, abandoning his whole journey, his very strength. Karasuno wins the point and, as a result, the set. But Kojukai is not happy. There's an idea that comes up in multiple character stories in Haikyuu, that running away from something you really want because of a failure or two only makes it worse. Sure, you get to hide away from the pressure, from the embarrassment and frustration, but something much worse takes its place. Now, I actually don't think quitting is always a bad thing. You might be surprised to hear me say that, but sometimes something just isn't resourceful for you anymore. Not every member of Karasuno plans to keep playing volleyball once they graduate, and that's not them quitting at all. It's just simply that they have other things they want to focus on in the future. But you know when you're giving up just because you're scared, or you're not willing to put the work in. You know if you're stopping for good reasons or not. You can't fool yourself. And it's clear which one it was for Yamaguchi as well. And the frustration he felt far worse than even the worst serve would have. I still sometimes think back to things years ago where I chickened out because I was scared of failing. Yeah, I've never once regretted my actual failures. Nothing hurts more than running away. And I know this is a bit of a side tangent and you guys probably just want to get to the next match, but I do just want to mention this idea that Ukai kind of touches on. I'm sure we'd all agree that anyone who looks down at someone for trying to improve themselves isn't a nice person. Especially someone who puts down someone who's still practicing and improving for making one mistake. That's really not the kind of person we want to deal with at all, right? And yet often we do that to ourselves. Yamaguchi certainly does here, even though never in a million years would he be that harsh to anyone else for one mistake. Something to think about. Anyway, moving on, Krasno wins the game, and it's finally time to take on Aoba Josai again. As the long-awaited rematch begins, Yamaguchi watches on as the two junior setters once again fight for control of the game. Krasno take the first set, and Hinata is initially a problem for Oikawa and his team, but with their new weapon Mad Dog on top of Oikawa's monstrous serves, Krasno are slowly being broken down and falling apart. With Hinata finally being shut down with seemingly no way out and the points piling up, Ukai is at a loss for a counter strategy, using his final timeout early. Everything Krasno has relied on up until now has been dismantled with no fix in sight, but even as the pressure and intensity mounts on the court, there's one man standing on the sidelines who's even more intense than any of them. He's had enough of seeing everyone around him get what he wants, except him. Please put me in the game. The score is 23-19. A 4-point gap is hard enough to overcome, let alone with just 2 points remaining. Yet, Yamaguchi subs in relaxed and ready. He's not looking at the score. Krasno hypes him up, but he doesn't need it. He's been preparing for this moment for months. These 8 seconds are all he needs. As Shimada says, just by having spoken to Ukai, this isn't the same Yamaguchi, and it really shows. Even Oikawa notices it. And so the whistle finally blows, the stadium goes silent, and he takes a deep breath. This is his moment.
It's out!
Krasno's half of the stadium erupts, whilst Aoba Josai's is confused by why 1 point deserves such celebration. But they didn't see the months of frustration, the late practices, the doubts, the despair, the desire to just feel adequate. And as Tsukishima says, and I love this part, it shouldn't be a surprise. He's practiced serving more than anyone, so why wouldn't he score a service ace? There's never anything wrong with Yamaguchi. There arguably wasn't anything special about what he did either. He just practiced and practiced. And again, why wouldn't someone who'd put in that much work have a great serve? That barrier, that curse, the way past it was simply time. Time spent wisely. And now, Aoba Josai looking at his serves with the same fear Krasno have of Oikawa's. He's done it. He's proved himself completely wrong. And now Aoba Josai supporters are proven even more wrong, because it's not just 1 point. He gets another serve and gets a second point against a player he would have only been able to look at with envy months prior, against 6 players he would have envied. A third point goes over thanks to Tsukishima, and as Yamaguchi's 4th serve goes through, Krasno tie up and his mental barriers shatter. Shimada sums it up perfectly. He's no longer worrying about getting it over. He's focusing on where he's aiming. And if Yamaguchi's story resonates with you, if you have this desperate desire to stop being so hopeless, that moment will come where you suddenly realize you don't have to try and scrape by for the bare minimum anymore. And soon enough, you'll forget you ever did. Yamaguchi's serves are eventually stopped, but this time, he walks off with his head held high, as he should. And what a beautiful story. So much of this I wish I could show my younger self, because it's just packed full of so many real, down-to-earth little gems. Haikyuu has this funny way of being completely different on each rewatch. It just feels like a whole new show, depending on what you've been going through lately. Certain scenes will stand out more, you'll see what characters do in different ways, and then soon enough, out of nowhere, you'll be hit with that scene that makes you pause the episode and just sit there, almost shocked as a single scene somehow perfectly presents the solution to your problem. Recently for me, it's been that feeling of being behind in life, and Haikyuu just solved it. It just got rid of that awful feeling for me. I've always liked the scene, but on my latest rewatch, it hit very, very differently. As is the case with all well-written shows, this scene doesn't start on the episode it's in, but much, much earlier. So let's head back to the start of season 4. Krasno just pulled off the impossible, taking down Shiro Torizawa and the overwhelming Ushiwaka. As they're testing the new vertical jumps, Kageyama gets the news that he's been selected for national level training, which realistically isn't too much of a surprise, but there's another announcement. A smaller first year only camp on a regional level is also being held. And when it was mentioned that one of the team was invited, I immediately assumed it would be Hinata, but as the news hits that it was in fact Tsukishima instead, combined with Kageyama being a dick about it, Hinata's frustration grows and grows, because this is not the first time he's been through this. Since day one, he's been the one left behind. He had to train on his own for a team sport for 3 years. You know, he struggled to do anything without Kageyama. He still kind of does. And now after finally making some progress, to have even made Ushiwaka acknowledge him, to be rejected for this camp is understandably extremely frustrating for him. And it's something I've been feeling a lot myself lately. You know, I've just started a new job and I put so much effort into all my exams through A-level in the university, but whilst I ended up getting top grades, it didn't really do much for me. Although it's not all bad, the current job is very frustrating, and I can't help but feel as though when I look around at people I know back where I used to live or people I went to university with and just where I thought I would be, I feel very, very behind and truthfully quite useless. I had that same overwhelming, stomach-churning feeling that Hinata has as he breaks into the first year training camp. You know, he takes this drastic, reckless action to try and catch back up with the hope he'll get to train alongside these other great players, but as he gets an earful of Ukai, the Shiro Torizawa coach tells Takada it's fine if we have another ball boy. And immediately this just sounds like a complete waste of time. I mean, being a ball boy whilst everyone else is training, but Coach Ukai says this is a brilliant opportunity for him, a point I'll come back to. However, the Shiro Torizawa coach evidently doesn't agree, as he brutally tells Hinata, without that Sessa Kageyama, I don't see any worth in you. And although it's a horrible, horrible thing to say, you can't hear something like that and not get fired up to prove them wrong. And so Hinata, with a fiery yell, declares, I'm a ball boy and I'm 164 centimeters tall. And it's really interesting that he mentions his height. Evidently that's something that's been on his mind as he's surrounded by all the giants selected for this training camp. However, this bravado doesn't last long, as by the end of the day he's realized that he spent all this time just as a ball boy, whilst everyone else is getting ahead and training. But just as I was thinking about how much this relates to my own situation, and I felt my own frustration growing again, Coach Ukai says a line that hit me like a truck, that made me pause the episode as all the pieces started fitting together in my brain. Think about what it is only you can do there. Don't go underestimating what it takes to be a ball boy. Why did I say Hinata spent his time just as a ball boy? Why did me, Hinata, and everyone else assume that being a ball boy would automatically be a bad thing? Because Hinata proves this very, very wrong. You know, what initially seemed like an awful situation turned out to be exactly what he needed. Obviously, I'm only 24. I don't have all the answers, but in my experience, things in life are far too complicated for us to be so sure that our initial assumption was correct. Often we can't know for sure until we really get stuck into it, or perhaps we won't even realize why until years and years later. You know, part of what makes Hinata so terrifying for the opponents is his relentless, inhuman drive to hit every single ball There's just no one else on the planet with that kind of drive because no one else was denied simply hitting the ball for so long. No one else had spent 3 years training alone for a team sport. That whole time he must have felt so frustrated, so disadvantaged, and so behind. And if you tried to explain to him that this would actually end up being so beneficial to him, he wouldn't have believed you. And yes, of course, if he had a more normal training route, his fundamentals would have been a lot stronger, but he can always work on those later, as he has done. But he got this unique, one-of-a-kind advantage from a seemingly awful situation. And hopefully you see the point I'm making. Don't be so quick to write things off as being awful. Even if it feels like they are, you very well may end up looking back and thinking, that led me down a much better path than I ever could have planned to. Now, of course, there will be exceptions to this, but as hard as it is to accept, sometimes not getting what you want in this very moment right now will get you something so much better for years to come. And it'll be something which is just incomprehensible to you right now. So in my case, let's suppose everything went the way I wanted. I got a perfect job out of uni, which paid really well and wasn't so long hours. There's just no way I'd have the same drive I do for this channel. There's no way I would, but if I tried to explain that to myself a year ago, where I was working a very humiliating job, I was pretty broke, I was just very miserable for reasons I'm not going to go into in this video, but if I tried to explain to myself then that I would actually look back at that period as a very important, very beneficial time in my life, I wouldn't have believed myself because there was just no way to explain to myself back then that it would result in this whole journey of me learning all these things and then eventually making a YouTube channel on it. And who knows how big this will become and where it will lead me. Maybe I'll come back to this video in a year, but as Hinata will tell you, you can't always tell where the ball is going just from watching it alone. You need to look at the whole court. It's just very unfortunate that we often can't do that until much later on. So we just need to have the faith that as long as we keep trying to progress, we keep working on ourselves and keep moving forward, at some point eventually the ball is going to come right to us. And that is exactly what happens. It's about halfway through the final set of Inarizaki, and Krasno are barely hanging on as Atsumu and his team continue to overwhelm them. Hinata's simple serve is received by Aaron, and after a couple back and forths, Atsumu leaps forward to set the ball to his twin, who then completely breaks the Krasno defense by baiting them into a block. The ball flies across to Aaron, and with no Krasno blockers in place, Atsumu just laughs as all the pieces fit together for Inarizaki and Krasno crumbles. Except for one man about to prove the whole world wrong about him, whose blind faith in himself, a faith that no one else or even he could really understand at the time, finally pays off. As everyone falls into silence in awe of what's just happened, Kagearen admits he never thought the day would come where he would say, "Nice receive," to Hinata. But Hinata isn't interested in any of that because as the ball connects with his hands, everything he's been through up until this point finally connects to. I don't know if this was intentional of the writer, but Hinata is in the exact right place at the exact right time, not just in terms of his receive, but in everything before that as well. All that time he spent at training camp just as a ball boy, that felt so frustrating and meaningless. Yet, if he hadn't taken the time to go through that kind of period, he would have never have achieved this beautiful receive. And now you're looking at it this way, you'll start to make the most of the situation that you're in. For Hinata, not having a team to practice with is about as awful as it can get for someone whose goal is to become a volleyball player, especially for a game so heavily dependent on teamwork. But instead of simply saying, well, I'll just have to wait until things change, he made the most of it, training on his own, training with the women's team, training with his friends who didn't even play volleyball when he could manage to convince them to do so. He took making the most of a bad situation to an insane level. But going back to what I was saying, maybe it wasn't a bad situation. As impossible as it may be to understand right now, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. I'm going through this right now, I'm looking around me at different players and wishing I was where they are, but the ball isn't going to them. It's going to somewhere I can't even figure out at the moment, but I know a year from now, I'll look back and realize that even if I couldn't realize it at the time, I was standing in the perfect place all along. We've all had that one line from a series at some point that really stuck with us. One of my favorite things about stories, and honestly the reason I often watch them in the first place, is for that bit of perspective and inspiration they can give us. Sometimes there's a character or scene which genuinely does change the way you see things through their story, and it really has a lasting impact on you. And sometimes all of that is summed up extremely well in a single line, which just seems to stick in our heads. As I'm sure you'd imagine, running a channel like this, I have a lot, but the one that's always stood out to me, that's always played in my head during my absolute lowest moments, is one from a very unexpected character, one that I thought nothing of at first. A character who embodies that feeling of average, which obviously by definition, most of us can relate to. Ryunosuke Tanaka, Haikyuu's ever-positive, hot-headed second year at Karasuno. Up until about halfway through season 4, whilst a very funny and likeable character, he doesn't really have any major moments. He's a solid player, but he's not really a standout in any aspect except his people skills and mental toughness, both of which are incredibly useful both on and off the court. Regardless, besides his occasional funny moment and show of guts, there's not too much more to say about him in the first few seasons. We never really get a look inside his head, besides knowing he likes Kyoko, but when we finally do, he gives us the single most motivating line I've ever heard. Karasuno's second match at Nationals sees them going up against last year's runners-up. So it was never going to be an easy match by any means, but I don't think any of us expected just how intense it was going to be. Kinoshita points out that whilst the opponents across the net are the same age as them, they are not normal high schoolers. They have players which have been featured in magazines and TV interviews. They have their own cheer squad with instruments and everything that are trained to boo when their opponents are up to serve. It's a world completely alien to most, one that's out of the reach of average people. And Karasuno come in as real underdogs to this match, but it soon becomes clear to the spectators that this is going to be a close game. You know, they recognize that just about everyone on this team is actually pretty damn good, and they're all really rising to the occasion as well, except maybe that one player. Tanaka is having a tough time this game. He just seems to be getting blocked again and again, as the spectators joke that he's just the energetic one, and that's all he's good for. We notice something is very different about Tanaka in this match. Usually he can just laugh and shrug off everything, confident he'll get the next one, but it's different this time. His spike is blocked and he just about manages to get out of the way in time for it to go out of bounds, but we see that doubt really creeping in as he celebrates. Sure, he got that point, but these repeated blocks have clearly left him doubting that he can even get past them. And as we near the end of the first set, the score is 24-23 to Karasuno, 1 point away from a huge upset. The ball comes to Tanaka and he's blocked once again. And once again, we see the frustration and fear building. To make matters even worse, with the two teams reaching a deuce, Atsumo's figured out exactly who to aim for next. The team's current weak point, Tanaka. But whilst he braces and hypes himself up, Nishinoya steps in to receive it anyway. And it's now that it really hits him. 48 points into the game, and he hasn't really done anything. Regardless, Karasuno win the next point and are in position to take the first set a second time. In spite of all his mistakes, Asahi sets the ball to Tanaka again and his line shot is out. Karasuno's second chance to win has once again slipped through Tanaka's fingers, and his piling mistakes are definitely starting to grate on him. Despite that, he continues to pump himself up, much to the shock of Inurizaki, because usually players struggling as much as Tanaka is right now become very quiet, but not Tanaka. He calls for the ball again, but Tsukishima ignores him. And as we know, Tsukishima doesn't do anything he hasn't calculated, so this was as cold of a truth as is possible. He didn't think Tanaka would score, and he's very rarely wrong. It seems to finally get to him. But if we calm down and look at what's happened so far, sure, the results might not be there yet, but that doesn't mean he's not doing well. He might have missed that spike just now, but it was only by an inch or two. Considering the pressure of the moment and triple block in front of him, he did pretty well just to spot the gap. Atsumu even thinks to himself that he's surprised Tanaka managed to get that shot through at all, as he was convinced he had him blocked. And it's not as though all those previous blocks were entirely his fault anyway. The one just prior to that, Kageyama actually apologized due to it being a bit short and also presumably a little bit predictable, as Enirizaki did have a 3-man block ready. He shouldn't be beating himself up as much as he is. It's not as though anyone can get through a triple block every time. And as Hinata points out, his blocking has been brilliant today. He's been a constant pain for Enirizaki. It's not as though blocking is one of his strong suits yet. He's doing well against the second strongest team in Japan. Tanaka is doing way better than he realized. And it's a really great point that his mood instantly picks up here after Hinata cheers him up. On his own, he would have never even thought about that. It's easy to be blind to your own progress and just focus on the negatives, but that doesn't mean it's always true. Sometimes it's a lot more noticeable to other people than ourselves. However, whilst it's obviously great to have someone who point that out for you to encourage you again, not everyone has that. So what are you supposed to do if you don't? Well, Tanaka actually has a great answer for that. A single line that will stick with me forever. The next point begins with Krasno at set point. Tsukishima's serve is received by Aaron and set to Osamu. Hinata attempts to block him, but Osamu doesn't feel threatened at all until Tanaka shows up. He is not beaten yet. The ball comes to Daichi, who easily sets it up for Kageyama. And he's got Hinata and Asahi ready and waiting. Their top 2 point scorers who are both doing brilliantly so far. But when the ball falls to Kageyama with the first set once again on the line, for the 3rd time, the person his eyes dart towards is Tanaka. And for pretty much the first time in the whole series, we get a real deep look inside his head. I've always known I'm average, although sometimes I do still think of myself as a prodigy. But right now, I'm not number 1 in anything on this team. That's no excuse, nor is it a reason to give up, and most of the time I don't even think about this stuff. But occasionally, once or twice a year, I get seriously down on myself, and I can't help but think I'm nothing but average. And the thing is, as you start to get older, you start to realize just how big the world is and how average you really are. And I feel exactly like Tanaka with regards to that. Most of the time, I don't even think about it, but there's those occasional moments where you realize that whatever it is you're going to try, there's countless thousands of people who've already been practicing it for years, many of which would have probably had a better starting point anyway. It's daunting to say the least. I mean, you've got a long road ahead of you. And as Tanaka says, that's not a reason to give up. Not at all. You know, I've mentioned in other videos that we shouldn't feel as though we have to be number 1 in the world for something to be worthwhile. But man, when everything is going wrong, it really can feel as though you're looking up at an endless mountain and those painful feelings of mediocrity here. Never mind being number 1 or anywhere close to that. It's more as though we're not moving at all, that the mountain will never end. But ever since I saw this scene, every time I felt that way, that nothing's going how I want it to, that I'm being hard on myself and it all feels hopeless, that same magical line plays in my head. Hey, Mr. Average, do you really have time to be looking down right now? And the obvious answer is no. That's not a luxury we can afford or honestly need. That mountain might be tall, but it's not going to get any easier if you hang your head. And why would you need it to be easier anyway? Sure, there's a lot of those stairs in front of you, but it's not like there's anything stopping you from taking that next step up. And those people that you're looking at, they had to take those stairs too. If you speak to them, you'll probably find some inspiration for some shortcuts, the way Tanaka did with Bokuto's cross shots. But above all, there's a reason you're climbing those stairs. There's a reason you're standing on that court, and it's because you want to. So no matter how rough things are or how painful it may be right now, the only thing to do is lift your head up to keep calling for the ball. Kageyama can only grin at this madman's tenacity. He sets the ball to Tanaka, and in spite of everything, he has just one thought. You can do it. His cut shot slices perfectly in between Inarizaki's receivers, and Karasuno win the first set. Tanaka's persistence, in spite of it all, paid off. And the thing is, the title of this video said one line. Well, I mean, I might have changed it since then because I sometimes change the title for click-through rates low, okay? But at the time of the recording, it said one line, right? And that's true. But if you've seen this show, you know there's a second scene, which doesn't quite have, a line you'll use forever. But it really completes Tanaka's journey. And I think if the first one resonated with you, this will really give you a sense of completion. So whilst Karasuno managed to take set 1, the second went very differently. Inarizaki smashed Karasuno with a huge point lead, tying the score up at 1-1. And during the set, we didn't see much of Tanaka at all. Even throughout the third set, Tanaka's very quiet. The set plays out with both teams being very closely matched, and it looks for a moment as though Karasuno might actually pull off the impossible. But then right at the end, in the blink of an eye, Atsumu gets a setter dump, Ginjama gets a spike, Inarizaki is at match point. Daichi tries to keep his team calm, but everyone is clearly feeling the pressure, and Tanaka looks deathly serious. Sure, he scored that awesome point earlier, but he's not done anything since then. He's just a normal guy, but on this court is the strongest high school setter in Japan, his equally dangerous twin, another national level setter, a national level ace, a libero that can receive those serves he couldn't, a wall he can't surpass, a teammate who can smash past that wall, another who can jump around it, and that's not even the full list. But we're suddenly taken to a flashback halfway through this set. On this court full of monsters, the average Tanaka can't help but think about all those times he's been blocked in this game, but he realizes something insane. He's on a roll. It might not look that way to anyone else, but he knows. He knows he's doing fantastically right now. As we mentioned earlier, and he's evidently realized, you can be doing everything right, and there's still this delay in the results showing up. But he also has this strange feeling that he shouldn't push his luck, and so he asks Kageyama to cut down on the sets he sends to him for a while. Turns out, Kageyama also realizes how well he's been doing, maybe even more so than Tanaka does, and responds, "No chance, we need your attacks, Tanaka." And he realizes that that was not Kageyama trying to make him feel better. He trusts Tanaka to do it. Not trust as in, I trust you with my prized possessions, but trust as in, I know you're capable of doing this. Don't stop now. Going back to the set, where the score is 24-22, and one mistake will lose Karasuno the game. Aaron serves the ball, which is received by Asahi and set by Kageyama to Tanaka. And once again, he's blocked. The ball falls to the ground, and it looks as though Karasuno is going to lose. Nishinoya just about saves them, and after a couple back and forths, Kageyama has to decide who to set to. And he realizes just how well Tanaka's been doing. Despite all the times he's been blocked, he's staying calm, he's playing well, and in particular, Tanaka's cut shot is incredibly lethal. One of Inarizaki's blockers called him a weaker Bokuto, which was meant to be an insult, but if you told Tanaka he was seen as a weaker version of a top 5 national ace, he'd probably take it as a compliment. Anyway, replaying Ukai's earlier voice in his head, Kageyama realizes that Tanaka's greatest weapon is not for the setter to decide. And so he sets a beautiful set right to the very end of the court. And I have to admit, this didn't really click for me the first, dozen times I watched Haikyuu. But he sets the ball in such a position that Tanaka has the choice to use his normal cut shot, which he's had some success with. Or, if he has the guts to use the attack that hasn't worked once today, his line shot, Kageyama isn't telling him to use it, because that would be beyond sadistic, right? To effectively force someone into using an attack they've missed repeatedly today whilst they're against match point. So he doesn't do that, but he gives Tanaka the option to. And as Tanaka jumps, he realizes something. He already knew Kageyama wasn't just trying to encourage him, but there's even more to it than that. What Kageyama said was a threat. The king of the court has put his faith in you. He knows you can do it. So don't you dare prove him wrong by hanging your head now. Keep calling for the ball so we can win. Inarizaki are very aware of his cross shot and have been shifting to block it. And as a result, all those times his cross shot has been blocked, all those failures, they've pried open a path for his line shot. And I don't know how he even managed to jump that high with his evidently titanium nuts. I mean, he almost lost the game with that same attack about 5 seconds prior, and he still went for it. But jokes aside, whilst not the most complicated or deep character in the world, Tanaka's whole journey to have a lot more courage in his supposedly average self always really inspires me. And I say supposedly average because his ability to pick himself up and keep going is definitely way above average. There's a scene where Tsukishima points out to him that it's not as easy as Tanaka makes it sound. But regardless, we all fall off a hit a wall from time to time, but there really is only one thing to do. Pick our head up and take another step. The self-loathing, the envy towards others, the frustration of a failure, none of those go away by beating yourself up. Just imagine if Tanaka did that. He would have walked off the court furious with himself for not continuing to play. A degree of accountability is good, but once you've realized things aren't going your way, or you feel like you're looking up at a mountain, the only thing to do is stand up once more and go again. I'm sure we'd all agree that one of Haikyuu's greatest strengths is its character writing. Everyone in Karasuno is not only very well written, but has a story that's incredibly inspiring and moving. Except maybe one, or so I thought, until eventually he changed the way I saw everything. But for a long time, I couldn't see his story as anything other than brutally sad. Because there's an idea in multiple character stories of continuing to practice and put in the work, even when it doesn't seem like anything is going your way. And it works out in the end for everyone, right? Yamaguchi with his service ace, Hinata with his ball boy arc, even Takada getting Ukai to join as coach. But arguably more than anyone, it applies to the third years, who stuck with it and kept training even when Karasuno was considered an average team at best, even when their upperclassmen didn't care or they had to train outside. But because they stuck with it, it all paid off for them, and they get to fight on the court, play the game they love, and go all the way to nationals with a brilliant team. Except Sugawara, who mostly just watches from the sidelines, with his only chances to play being when he's subbed into the pinch server or when Kageyama needs to come off. Suga is reliable, experienced, and well-rounded. In 99.9% of schools, there wouldn't be a first-year setter strong enough to replace him, but unfortunately, Kageyama is just on another level entirely, and able to make the most out of Hinata too. It was a tough choice for Ukai because he too lost his place in his third year to a first year, but he has to do what's right for the team, and so Sugawara loses his starting position that he waited so long for. But let's go back to shortly before that officially happens. Karasuno has a practice match against Coach Ukai's friends. Being down a setter on the opposing team, the two must decide amongst themselves who will play for Karasuno's side and who won't. At this point in the series, they'd only had one practice game in which Kageyama had to play setter as part of the condition that Albajose set in exchange for the practice match. Being desperate for practice, they accepted it without too much discussion, but it was still very much up in the air as to which of the two would be the official setter. But Sugawara deep down already knows Kageyama is unfortunately just a better player than him, and so he sadly steps over to the opposing side, giving up his official position. The situation seems so harsh, almost cruel, but I'll come back to that because it turns out it really isn't. However, I want to talk about what Sugawara says next. Kageyama asks Suga if he's stepping down just to allow Kageyama to take the position, and says he'll refuse if so. Suga's response is completely unexpected. He says when Kageyama showed up and challenged him for the position, he was relieved. Now, remember the year previously, Krasno lost so brutally to Date Tech that Asahi didn't get a single spike in. There's no doubt Suga feels a lot of the blame for that, especially as it resulted in Asahi leaving the club afterwards. But with Kageyama taking his place, he wouldn't have that stress, that pressure on him. We also see him mention later on that a lot of the times, teams would aim for him because of his short height. No doubt he's given up a lot of points that way, or he wouldn't have mentioned it. But these things that felt so stressful that he wished would go away, that he dreaded at the time, he ended up missing them. And it's this scene here that completely changed the way I think about so much. In the first match against Alba Josai, Krasno are miles behind, and Kageyama is not his usual self. It's clear that right now, Oikawa is simply playing better than him. And so it finally happens. The moment Kageyama had been dreading, and Sugawara had been waiting for. Kageyama is subbed off. Sugawara is subbed in. And ordinarily, he likely wouldn't be able to match Oikawa, considered the strongest all-around player in the tournament. But the time he spent on the bench wasn't wasted. In the same way Hinata's ball boy arc seemed like a setback, but actually ended up being brilliant for him in the long run. Sugawara being on the sidelines allowed him to see the game more clearly, to see things he never would have noticed otherwise. And so for the next few points, Sugawara completely runs rings around Oikawa. All of his plays are read like a book, and he's even able to get Hinata his first real block on a player 10 inches taller than him. In the second set, Sugawara is able to hold his own against Oikawa, as the two teams are neck and neck for a long time, but Oikawa's serves are just as fierce as the first set, and Sugawara, whilst very reliable and solid, it eventually becomes clear to Oikawa that he's still quite readable, and short too. And so, as Alba Josai pull ahead, Suga can sense it. His time on the court is running out. And then, the moment that changed how I saw so much, Sugawara can feel the panic of his spike is getting blocked, the stress of his set's not working, and this time it doesn't bother him, because he knows he'll miss it as soon as he steps off, so he'll appreciate every single second whilst he can. And it suddenly hit me, how many times have I not done that? I often look back at a certain period in my life and think, oh, I miss when things were like that. Or I wish I'd done this at that time, made the most of those circumstances I had back then. And yet at the time, all I was focusing on was the problems I had, the negatives. I know it's partly because you forget the negatives when you look back, but it's also undoubtedly that I wasn't really appreciating what I had at all. And watching Sugawara go through this and begin to appreciate not only all the pressures of the court, but the time he spends on the bench too. It made me realize that he's loving all his problems, every single one, every day. And don't get me wrong, I know it's not always that easy, and there's obviously extreme circumstances that you're definitely not going to look back at and think, oh, I missed that time. Nor are you just going to be able to just love all your problems in those kind of circumstances. But I couldn't deny that a lot of the time, that just wasn't the case for me. The time passed by, and when I look back, I feel like I wasted it. But Suga isn't going to feel that way for a second, because he's done everything he can to make the most of every second on the court. Not just in terms of his training, but mentally. He tells Ukai that no matter what the circumstances, he just wants whatever time on the court he can get, because it would just be silly to let things like that ruin his experience. And Ukai seems to have the same realization I did, that he didn't do the same, and that it just doesn't make sense to get caught up on, I only got to play this much, I only went time when Kageyama was injured. He may look back and wish he got to play more, but if he doesn't even make the most of the time he does get, he'll definitely regret that. And if he wants to keep playing more volleyball later on, no doubt the opportunity will be there for him. Of course, that doesn't change the fact that it's still so bittersweet to see his thought process as he realizes he's about to be subbed off. Let me stay here. Let me keep playing. let me be the one to put the ball up. He's not saying that to Ukai or to anyone. He just has this silent, strong desire to want to play more. But somehow it feels like he's not so much sad about it ending as he is hopefully gets another chance. And honestly, I think he realizes how beautifully lucky he is to have something that moves him so much, that consumes him and makes him want to do anything for even a second more, because how many people never experience that? They never experience something that moves their very soul. Maybe that's you. And if it is, be ready to appreciate every single second when you find it, because while Suga's time on the court is limited, so is everyone's. Unless you manage to make it a full-time job, you're going to have other responsibilities, other work that comes up that limits how much you get to do what you love. Even if you do become a pro, one day you'll have to retire. Everyone's time is limited, and only the lucky few make the most of it, fully appreciate it. And so as Suga gets his final play of the game, Asahi promises to make it count. And as he smashes past the block, Suga walks off with a smile. Ukai praises him for holding his own against Oikawa and inadvertently makes Suga extremely happy as he says, next time, use the center more. Next time, he'll get another chance. Moving ahead, Karasuno unfortunately loses this match, leaving Suga and the other third years a choice to make. Will they play in the spring tournament or leave the club to give them more time to focus on their exams? Of course, if they do leave, their defeat to Alba Josai will be the last game they ever played at high school. The school advisors heavily try to discourage Sugawara in particular, as he's not even on the starting team, yet it's potentially jeopardizing his chances at college for it. And by the way, my advice on this is just to stay on the damn sports team, because as long as you don't overdo it and you use your time outside of it wisely, your grades will be fine and you'll regret leaving it. But anyway, the other advisor isn't necessarily wrong. Thus Suga won't get any material benefit, but that's not why he plays this game. And meanwhile, Takada tells Hinata the third years need to make the decision they won't regret. And again, he's right when he says no one will know what that is until the time comes. But Suga already knows that every second he can get on the court is completely worth the days and weeks that went into standing there. Throughout the rest of the series, he's subbed in as a pinch server when needed, as he's shown to have a particularly reliable, accurate serve that can be used to bring the opposing ace to one knee. He subbed in most games from here on out, even if only briefly. In fact, I believe it's every game except the very first one at Spring Qualifiers and the Waku South game. And whilst it does slightly break my heart to see him on the sidelines so often, I know that he's living in a way that will keep him very happy for the rest of his life. He might have only been a good setter, but Sugawara is an incredible character. I've left out a crucial part in all of my videos, and that's because truthfully, I've not been applying it myself until now. And I've been paying the price for it. You'll have gone through this too, and that is the constant feeling of I'm not doing it. But by the end of this video, you won't ever be worrying about it again. With the countless comments about how much my videos have helped people, I felt like I had to make this video to include a detail I hadn't yet mentioned, and it's demonstrated perfectly in episode 11 of Haikyuu's latest season. Right at the end of Karasuno's long battle with Inurizaki, the score is tied at 30-all. Osamu serves the ball and the receives comes back to Kageyama, who, with nerves of absolute steel, flicks a setter dump over the net to put Karasuno at match point. But they're exhausted. The rate at which they've been attacking is simply not sustainable, and as such, they're desperate to end this as soon as possible. With a familiar call of just one more point, Tsukishima's clever mind games return as his serve completely catches Inurizaki off guard, and Karasuno begins to relentlessly launch attacks at them. It seems sure that they're going to win, but their wise coach Ukai seems to think otherwise. He desperately shouts from the sidelines, "Take it slow, slow down." And I remember being really confused as to why the first time I saw this, because why was he telling a team renowned for its speed to slow down? That was what had got them to where they were, and the blistering attacks Karasuno were firing off, they were sure to win, right? Wrong. As he says this, the corners of the screen darken. Karasuno have hit a point where they're going so fast, their attacks are becoming less and less effective, to a point where nothing is happening besides tiring themselves out even more. Their speed has become a curse until, with a call of, "I've got it," the wings of Karasuno grounds his team with a beautiful high pass. Such a simple, trivial thing, yet everyone forgets it. But in that moment, it was the best decision any of them could have made. And you might guess where this video is going from here, but there's so much more to it. There's a crucial point in Daichi being so shocked at where Hinata got this from that I'll come back to. But before that, here's a question for you. How often have you said, health is the most important thing? At least a few times, right? But how often have you actually prioritized your health? I believe in sacrificing things which don't really bring you any actual enjoyment for. Things that do, in working hard, being disciplined and aiming high, but only after you've taken care of yourself. You're likely not taking it to the same extreme I was, but I bet if you're also honest with yourself, you've said the line, health is the most important thing countless times, but almost never actually prioritized it, and no one's been more guilty of this than I have recently. As mentioned in this community post a while back, my working weeks recently have been ridiculous hours. Hence why the upload rate has just been so slow. But really it should have been even slower. I was staying up till 2 AM getting 4 or 5 hours sleep, not going to the gym, not eating some days, not doing anything but working on these videos. And I do just want to reiterate that this purely came from my own slightly reckless ambition. There hasn't been a single comment saying, you need to upload more, why haven't you uploaded, or anything like that. It's so that everyone watching this kind of content understands that it takes a long time to make these scripts, like they are hard to make. But the point stands that I was sacrificing my health for speed, and it was having a detrimental effect on me because eventually I hit the point where that lack of sleep really caught up to me. I wasn't able to come up with the ideas for the scripts because I was just too tired to focus. Just like Karasuno, my speed was slowing me down. And I think that's actually likely the best, most common example. Trying to go too fast and staying up late to work will actually slow you down, because the next day you're just going to sit there and stare at the screen because you're too tired to actually work. In a different video, which I'll link at the end, I talk about how you're likely aiming too low but trying to go too fast. The complete opposite of Hinata's high, slow toss. And there's two main reasons for that. The first of which is frustration at feeling behind. Now, Hinata knows this better than anyone. Remember, this guy could barely train for years. He'd spend years with no one to train with for a team sport. Then he had to watch both Tsukishima and Kageyama get called up for national training. And I couldn't even imagine how frustrating being relegated or seemingly relegated I'll come back to being a ball boy after going through all of that must have felt for him. Now, you might feel behind from the people around you, but you also get a lot of pressure without even realizing it from online, which links in very nicely to the next point, and that is unrealistic time frame expectations. So imagine Hinata on day one, when he barely knew how to play volleyball, saying, I'm going to be like those pro players I saw on TV in 3 weeks. Or that guy says, well, I'm going to start going to gym and look like this guy after 2 months. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? But a very similar thing is likely happening to you without you realizing it. So our brains are simply not wired to process anything more than a few people around us in our little tribe. So the online world is incredibly difficult for us to process. You see the top 0.01% of the world in your Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, whatever feed. And the algorithm makes your brain feel as though everyone is doing that well. And because you don't see how long they spent working to get to that stage, your brain simply can't handle it. It gets frustrated because it doesn't understand why it's not there right now. Hence you get into this awful state and suffer the big problem I've faced lately, and the one that Hinata has solved to me. You've likely experienced something very similar where, even though realistically you're just not in a state to work, you feel like you're falling behind if you don't, or you can't shake that feeling that you should be doing something all the time. Maybe you've even had it to the same extreme I had, where you'd be out doing something else, you know, seeing friends, seeing family, and you'll feel like you should be working. You feel almost agitated whenever you're not doing something productive. And this links in really nicely to an earlier scene, which is Hinata's perfect receive. Remember how Hinata spent half a season just as a ball boy? How at the time it seemed like a complete waste of time, because after all, what possible good could come from being a ball boy? It seemed like everyone else was flying way ahead of him, that everyone else was in a much better situation than he was, as though they were doing so much more than him. But if it wasn't for Hinata's time at the camp, he would have never honed his receiving skills to the level needed to pull off that beautiful receive. And in the context of this scene, he would have never even thought about slowing down his play. That's the complete opposite of his current playstyle. But without that, Krasno would have likely lost this game. This seemingly pointless situation he was forced into gave him a unique advantage, and one he never would have found if he'd kept going full speed all the time. Which is exactly why Dutch was so confused as to where this new Hinata had come from. Simply going full speed all the time is often not the best way to go about doing things. You know, you're not falling behind because you're spending some time doing other things. Within reason, of course. Obviously, if you're unhappy and your routine is what I used to be a few years ago, where you just wake up and play League of Legends for 12 hours a day, then you're taking it too easy, you know. And I've got a ton of videos to help you with that. But if that's not you, here's something to bear in mind. The reason you and I strive towards whatever goal it is you're aiming for is to feel good, right? Whether it's feeling good about your physique from the hours at the gym, feeling good about your grades from hours studying, or for me, obviously, it's my subscriber goal. But there's plenty of other things in life that will make you feel good too. And I don't mean instant, short-lasting gratification. I mean genuinely good. You know, social connection, time in nature, learning new hobbies, trying new things. Or for me, where I've not been going to gym, sleeping enough, or eating enough, I've lost a noticeable amount of gain. And that really hurts to look at myself. And you know what? If I can't hit my sub goal without sacrificing my sleep, ruining my health, cutting out my social life, then I simply can't hit that goal. I'm still aiming for 50k, but if I can't hit it without depriving myself of all these essential things, then so be it. Some things can and should be sacrificed, but some things definitely should not be. Now, of course, you can't do everything, and it's a very difficult balance to find, but it's important to remember there's so much more to life than any one thing. Also, that nothing will make you feel better than good health. And if you're sacrificing your health in the slightest, then much like Krasno's attacks, it simply isn't sustainable, which of course is always the most important thing. So take care of yourself first. Go to gym, cook that healthy food, get enough sleep, then work on your ambitions, not vice versa. And give yourself some time to do the other things in life that matter. And just like Hinata's past, you'll go higher than you ever would have, focusing on just spiking at 100% speed all the time. Name a Krasno starting member, and chances are you can think of multiple big scenes they've had. Huge game saving or winning moments, brilliant bits of character development, or just pure hype. But there's one player that doesn't really apply to. Sure, he has his moments, but compared to these huge scenes with flashbacks, multiple minutes of build-up, and even their own unique soundtracks, he doesn't really have anything like that. And that's the captain, Daichi. But there's actually a lot more to say about him than it first seems. His story goes a lot deeper than I realized the first time I watched Haikyuu, and it's one that could have gone very differently if it wasn't for his incredible mental strength. Also, it's one you'll notice has a lot of similarities with Hinata's. A lot. Firstly, he too lacked a real team that shared his crazy love for the game. Sure, unlike Hinata, he did at least have one to train with, but they weren't really interested in it. Besides him, no one on his team ever believed there was any chance of winning. His final game in high school also ends with a crushing defeat, leaving him frustrated, but above all, wanting to play more volleyball. Having seen Krasno on TV, he too wanted to play for them. However, when Daichi arrives with the other third years, he's met with a completely different Krasno. The wingless crows don't even seem to be able to walk. let alone fly. With no coach, a disinterested team, and their contacts with other schools completely lost, it would have been all too easy to just give in to the despair, because this is seemingly Karasuno's lowest point. Even if he got his fellow first years to be as hyped up as he was, you can't play volleyball with 3 players. But I think Daichi's experience when he was younger taught him something very, very valuable, because no matter how hopeless it may seem or how disinterested people are, once they lose at the end of the tournament, they're frustrated, incredibly frustrated. We see it from multiple teams. In the same episode, we find out about Daichi's backstory. They stand on the court and realize they can't suddenly become a strong team. They wish they practiced more, they wish they took it more seriously, they wish they got to play more volleyball. Even if it doesn't seem like there's an opportunity right now, you'll regret not preparing for it when it does arrive. And so he not only trains hard, he trains after hours. He coaches his fellow first years, finds a manager, does everything he possibly can, going above and beyond every single day, despite how meaningless it seems. He knows nothing will come of it for at least this year, but he still does it every single day without fail. And some of that energy did carry over a little to his upperclassmen, who get a little bit pumped up at least, but it was too little, far too late. Karasuno lost by 8 points in the second round to a team we never hear of again, so presumably weren't that good themselves. And it's now the third years finally feel the regret of it all, far, far too late. And his former captain leaves him with those words that define Daichi's and many other characters' journeys. There's a chance Karasuno may never get stronger, and if it does, it will probably be years from now. But if that chance appears, you'd better grab it. It's not too uncommon to hear people worry about, oh, what if I spend years doing this and it wouldn't work out? Wouldn't that be a waste of time? But not doing it, not preparing and not practicing will feel like far more of a waste of time. And I've mentioned how Hinata and Daichi stories have a lot of parallels. Both had to, with absolutely no guarantee of anything coming of it, create an opportunity for themselves that otherwise wouldn't exist. Hinata had to during his ball boy arc, and Daichi had to from day one at Karasuno. He had to do everything he could to improve himself as much as possible, so that if the new members the next year or the following year turn out to be strong, he'd be able to grab that opportunity. And of course, as we know, in both years they got some great members. And it's because of Daichi's perseverance that when Hinata joins Karasuno, it's very different from when Daichi joined. He doesn't walk into a team disinterested and hopeless. He walks into a team that's full of fire, that's ready to give nationals everything they have. It was a real reminder for me that if you don't like the mood of your environment, your work, your house, maybe your team as well, the way you act can have a real knock-on effect. It can take a long time, but if you're more positive, if you're more ambitious, slowly but surely, others around you will want to match that because they'll just feel awkward not doing so. And have probably been wanting to be that way anyway, but just felt awkward being the only one. And imagine if Daichi hadn't been so dedicated and so ambitious. Suga and Asahi likely wouldn't have matched that energy, certainly not to the same extent. And then who knows if Tanaka and Nishinoya would have. It certainly wouldn't have reached a level that could inspire Tsukishima and Yamaguchi. Daichi started something incredible, and these two joining was such a switch that suddenly all that pointless practice and worthless optimism turned into something very, very worthwhile. And it's funny how that happens, that all that effort that felt so hopeless and was probably almost sort of looked down on and sneered at by others, then you hit a certain level, a certain event, and it's like a switch is flicked and you become immeasurably grateful for it. It's all finally paid off. Their strong first and second years won't be let down by their third years because they've ensured that they're strong too. Karasuno is finally strong again, and they couldn't have asked for a better captain to lead them. Brilliant people skills, knowing when to step in and when not to. Even when others' initial reaction is to step in, he handled the difficult start of Hinata and Kageyama perfectly, and has a constant reassuring voice that constantly lifts his team spirits and calms players down, without ever feeling fake or forced. And above all, he's the player who, the majority of the time, has to handle the most stressful situations. The pressure of the winning point often goes to Hinata, and there's plenty of pressure there of course. But if he misses, well, the game carries on. But on the occasions where Karasuno has been 1 point off defeat, usually with the opponent's top server holding the ball, there's no room for error. And most of the time, the responsibility naturally falls to Daichi to handle it, and he's never once let his team down. Even when it's just a set point, the pressure must be immense. Yet even against the likes of Oikawa, not once has Daichi let his team down. Of course, being human, he does miss the occasional receive, but not once has he missed one when it really counts. He's taken the brunt of their strongest opponents' strongest weapons, and always managed to survive them, much to his opponent's annoyance. He's a foundation that holds the whole team together, and now his vision that he fought for years is finally happening. And he deserves every second of it, because none of this would have happened had he not been so serious about his first year. And the crazy part is, he was willing to give that all up for the good of the team. Following their defeat to Aoba, the third years now have to decide if they'll play in the spring tournament or not. And in spite of how long he's waited for this, now that that chance is finally in his hands, and he has a team strong enough to potentially make it to nationals, he's willing to give that up to let the first and second years develop. I don't actually think it would have helped them if he had stood down, because there is no way they would have gone as far as they did without him. With how close the Aoba match was, losing Daichi would have definitely resulted in them losing that game, which then would have meant they wouldn't have had the development they got in the Shiratorizawa and Inurazaki games. But either way, just the fact that he was willing to do that, he was willing to do what he thought would help the team after waiting so long for this, really shows what a great guy and captain he is. Thankfully, Sugawara talks him out of it, but even so, he has the humility to realize that whilst he started this crazy chain reaction, it's not just him that has this vision, and it's not just him that contributes to it either. But regardless, even though he never really gets the credit for it, in my eyes, Daichi's the man who started Karasuno's rebirth, and embodies one of my favorite ideas from Haikyuu, that even when it seems like there's no point, as though nothing is happening even though you're putting the work in, one day something will happen to make all of it worthwhile, but only if you keep going. I hope you'll find this video a little different to the other Tsukishima videos you've seen before. I'm going to give quite a new take on it, because to me, his story is so much more than just someone learning to love volleyball. It's someone who overcomes a lot of the things we all go through at our lowest points. As corny as it sounds, it's about a man who's always seen the world for what it is, but over time, rather than separate himself from it, starts to love it in the most beautiful way. I know this is a long video, but if you stick to the end, you'll hopefully leave glad you did. Haikyuu is not a volleyball anime. It's so much more. Our first introduction to the rookie giant initially feels against the spirit of Haikyuu. After 2 episodes of Kageyama and Hinata yelling about how much they love volleyball and how important winning this upcoming match against the other first years is, Tsukishima shows up talking about how it's just a club and how he doesn't even mind throwing the game. But you know what? He's lying. He claims not to care about volleyball, but he would never have thrown this game. We see his frustration at losing the first set, the effort he puts in, despite all his talk about how this match doesn't matter to him. The second he steps on the court, that all falls away, as though he's thinking so intently about the match himself that he forgets everything outside of it. In these little moments where he lets his guard slip, we see him taking it very seriously, as pointed out by Daichi. And this makes me see his line about how he can't stand those who get worked up over a dumb game completely differently. Notice how he never really states why they annoy him. I doubt he's even aware of the reason himself at this point, but more than anything, it's a defense mechanism. Volleyball is clearly important to him and something he takes very seriously, but he tries to play it down, calling it a dumb game. And about a third of the way through season 2, we finally see why. These two, who plan to take the upcoming match so seriously, are essentially forcing Tsukishima into confronting his past and his worst fear. In a flashback of him and his brother, we see a very different Tsukishima, one so full of excitement and wonder at the world of volleyball, who wants to hear every detail of every game, who takes such pride in his brother's status as the ace and marvels at the idea of national tournaments. His love and hunger for volleyball might not have been on Hinata's level, but it was still very intense. However, once he sees the truth about his brother, his eyes dull as he sees the world completely differently. The way he describes this revelation is so dramatic it almost seems slightly over the top, but that's purely because at this point, volleyball basically was his life. From here on out, Tsukishima struggles to enjoy volleyball the way he once did, something we've no doubt all experienced. For one reason or another, we just can't enjoy the things we used to. Maybe they start to feel pointless. Maybe we're scared of trying for fear of failure. Maybe we can't even explain it, but our shine, our joy is just gone, and it all feels very dark. To Tsukishima, the fact that he'll never be able to reach the very top of the world, that it's just the sport, stifles his enjoyment of it. The fact that he can't logically see the point in it prevents him from loving it the way he used to. But he never stops playing volleyball. It's as though he's constantly fighting these thoughts of meaninglessness and hopelessness. And I think he's partly quite jealous of Hinata and Kageyama, who can love the sport so much, regardless of whether it's quote, meaningless or not. But he also sees them as fools who, in his eyes, don't understand the pain that's ahead of them. The moment when their hard work and ambition eventually hits a wall, leaving them filled with despair and frustration, just like his brother. And as we know, this does happen to Karasuno, and they're heartbroken by it. In particular, Hinata and Kageyama are filled with that kind of frustration that you just can't really do anything about or get rid of quickly. They had such high aspirations, whereas Tsukishima had his much lower, and as such, is the only one not crying at their meal after their defeat. But there's two main points on this. Firstly that, whilst he may not cry, Tsukishima is still very clearly upset. He's more of a flat, resigned look on his face, as though he knew this was going to happen. Secondly, whilst he might have slightly protected himself should this outcome happen, think about all the joy and excitement he missed out on in exchange for that. The thrill of victory, the rush of a great block, the simple joy of volleyball. Obviously he's still playing, but he's not experiencing the same excitement the rest of Karasuno is. In believing it's all meaningless, he doesn't get that same excitement he otherwise would. More than anything, Tsukishima showed me that to truly experience joy, you have to be willing to risk and endure sadness. Something his older brother seems to realize as he gets older and wiser, but we'll come back to that. Moving into season 2, at a Tokyo training camp, the Nekoma coach comments on how all of Karasuno is evolving and progressing, except for Tsukishima. At the end of the day, when everyone else sticks around for extra training, Tsukishima simply leaves, saying there's no point in it. And I do think this is partly just him doing things his own way. He's not at all wrong in saying that there reaches a point where you'd be better off just recovering instead of overdoing it. And Tsukishima having his own approach to volleyball is something I'll come back to. However, the main reason he walks away is clearly just down to him not really having the motivation to, and also his fear of all that effort going to waste. However, there's two main events which begin a shift in his attitude both towards volleyball and the world itself. Firstly, when Kuro and Bokuto call him over for extra practice, initially Tsukishima has no interest, but when Kuro taunts him about his skills, it suddenly lights a fire under him, whose pride as a volleyball player is at stake. There's no logical reason for him to join in, but why would he need a reason? Again, as soon as he steps on the court, all these thoughts fall away, and we see him acting very differently, up until the moment Kuro mentions his rivalry with Hinata, of course unaware of how Tsukishima's older brother, the player Tsukishima idolized, lost his spot in the team to the player Hinata idolized, the Little Giant. It's clear any mention of Hinata makes Tsukishima particularly uncomfortable for this reason, as he dreads ending up the same way as his brother. So, as he's always done, he downplays the situation, writing himself off as unable to beat Hinata before walking away. Kuro comments how that simply isn't true. Both have their unique strengths and Tsukishima should really be seeing himself above Hinata rather than below him. He's so caught up in his own thought process. He's seeing himself as inferior to everyone else, even when it just isn't true, as the rest of the team is quite literally running off ahead of him in their uphill battle. The moon's light just isn't quite what it should be. And it's at this moment here that Yamaguchi shows up. The player who, what Tsukishima's saying, could arguably apply to the most. Yamaguchi won't ever be the best in the world, and his practice is all just for a single moment, which could very easily end up a waste, according to Tsukishima's definition of it, if his serve misses. And it's this man that bluntly tells him, "You're being lame," and demanding to know why Tsuki isn't trying to beat Hinata. He follows up with a line that really stuck with me. "Why do you keep drawing random lines, telling yourself anything past them is impossible?" It stuck with me so much because when I look back at myself when I've been in a bad place, that's exactly what I was doing. I can't do this because of this. I know I should be doing this, but I just can't bring myself to. But it's obviously not as easy as just hearing something like that and snapping out of it, especially when you have all these seemingly logical reasons. To the person in that headspace, these lines aren't random at all. But really think about what Tsukishima is saying here, because it's a brilliant point in its own right. Even if I become the best on Karasuno, even if we go to nationals, then what? Eventually someone better will show up no matter what. You'll always lose to someone. You'll never be the best. But as Yamaguchi points out, who cares about that? This is something I see a lot of people struggle with. Well, I'll never be the best in the world, so it's pointless. If I was to say to you right now that I'm never uploading again because my channel won't be as big as Mr. Beast, what would you say? It doesn't make sense, does it? What Tsukishima is saying sounds logical to him, but it really isn't. What he's saying isn't technically wrong, but to simply never play volleyball, to claim it's all meaningless because he'll never be the best, just doesn't make sense. But in his eyes, the only way to avoid his brother's fate would be to be number one, to never lose. He's so afraid of this that he's just going round in circles in his brain, unable to realize the simple truth. You don't need a big reason. It can just be for fun, curiosity, or as Yamaguchi says, pride. Something about his timid friend suddenly getting in his face seems to snap Tsukishima out of it, compared to the stupid, tired circles he's been thinking in. What Yamaguchi said is just cooler. Between sucking at volleyball and being good at it, it's obvious which one is cooler. Between cursing the world and loving it, it's obvious which one is better. Again, I know it's not as simple as that, as I'll come back to, but I love that in the anime, they show the moon's light returning, as Tsukishima gives a very different kind of smile to his usual smirk for the first time. The moon reflects the light of the sun, but this time it's not from Hinata, but Yamaguchi, as Tsukishima is finally able to take his first step out of the cold darkness and back into the light coming from the court. Of course, a change like that isn't going to be instantaneous, as we're about to find out from Bokuto. Tsuki quite plainly asked him about the worry he's been having. Given that you will eventually lose, given that you won't make it all the way to the top, why practice so hard? And I absolutely love that Bokuto's answer isn't simply, just see it this way, or you're looking at it wrong. That's part of it, but again, especially when we think about this in the context of relating to our own lowest points, it's just not as simple as that. Bokuto asks him if he actually enjoys volleyball. When Tsukishima responds, not really, Bokuto simply says, isn't that because you suck? Which Tsukishima is a tad offended, but Bokuto reveals it's only recently he started enjoying it. His cross shots kept getting blocked, so he practiced straights every single day until one day, in one match, he smashed past a quite-literal wall in front of him. And from there on out, he loved volleyball. A single, simple moment had him hooked. And again, this is a nice little point in its own right. Truthfully, things are just more enjoyable once you reach a certain level in them. For instance, we're not really supposed to say this as YouTubers, but the honest truth is, it's more exciting making videos at 40,000 subs than it is at 40. You don't have to be the best in the world, as we spoke about earlier, but things are honestly just more enjoyable when you feel competent in them. And in the context of this scene and this video, Bokuto is simply telling Tsukishima, keep going until that happens, until you have that moment. And that if he keeps going through all the struggles and hardships, if he keeps at it, one day that moment will come. The spark will be relit. And looking back, this is one of my favourite scenes in the whole series, just because of how real it is. Bokuto isn't telling him he's wrong. He's not saying that his reasons for loving volleyball are the reasons everyone should have. And he's also fully aware that just saying things only goes so far. So for example, later on, Tsukishima hypes himself up to block a few of Ushiwaka's spikes, but that very quickly crumbles and doubt sets in once he goes up against him in reality. For our minds to fully change, we often need something in the real world to convince us. It's not the only joy in the world, but having a moment where you realize, damn, 6 months, a year ago, I could never have done this. It all worked out, is electric. There's a million different ways to have that moment. It's accessible to everyone, and it could be something huge, or it could be something so insignificant to the rest of the world. Something as small as a single volleyball point. But when that moment comes, you'll realize how wrong about yourself you were. And it's this conversation that is the birth of Karasuno's immovable object, a monster capable of taking on even national level aces. We see a slightly different Tsukishima for the rest of season 2, one who's constantly thinking and seeking a way to have that moment, and we get a beautiful scene of him and his brother. Turns out his brother kept playing volleyball, despite all the humiliation of what happened. In fact, because of it, he just kept going until he finally got his moment. After reminding Tsukishima that he's a lot better than he thinks he is, the torch has finally been passed. It's Tsukishima's turn now. And it's funny how ever since Ushiwaka encountered Hinata on the street, the final showdown was set to be a match of Karasuno's first year duo against Ushiwaka's brute strength. Oikawa warned Ushiwaka that Karasuno was more than just Hinata and Kageyama, but not for a second do I think he had Tsukishima in mind when he said that. The big game finally begins, and Ushiwaka's every ounce the unstoppable force he was made out to be. Elite power, height, jumping, stamina, and technique are just part of his endless list of strengths, all multiplied by his left-handed nature, making his spikes even harder to receive. He's so much more than just Karasuno's strongest enemy to date. To Tsukishima, he's everything he doesn't want to think about, playing volleyball with an unbelievable intensity, with enough strength to force Tsukishima to face every one of his self-doubts. He has to finally make his choice. Will he write himself off as weaker than those he's up against, or fight to prove that he's not? Ushiwaka single-handedly destroys Karasuno in the first set, and Tsukishima still has doubts about himself. Despite positioning himself right, he still lets Ushiwaka spike through, believing it was a lost fight before he even jumped, caused him to not block the way he should. But instead of wallowing in his frustration, Tsukishima hatches a plan. In spite of all the taunts, he stays calm, factoring details that no one else is paying nearly as much attention to. The pressure it's putting on Ushiwaka, the way their blocks looked at him, the little bit of stress gradually applying on Shirota Ozawa's setter. This first-year rookie, who claims this sport is meaningless, plans to take down one of the greatest in the country at it. And although each time Ushiwaka gets past him, it looks like nothing but a failure to the rest of the stadium, Tsukishima knows that slowly but surely he's getting closer each time. His progress might seem invisible to the rest of the world. It might not be something concrete yet, but eventually, it will happen. The whole stadium goes quiet. This is just a club. It's just 1 point out of 25. Outside the stadium, the world carries on as normal. It hasn't changed the world, but it didn't need to. It's just a volleyball point, but it's the culmination of all of his struggles finally paying off. Above all, it's proof that no matter how empty and hopeless you may feel, if you just keep going, one day, from your very soul, you'll yell. Would you call that meaningless? With a single block, Tsukishima's whole previous identity shatters. 54 episodes into Haikyuu, we get one of the most legendary scenes I've ever seen. The excitement of a man who fell in love with both volleyball and the world itself. Rather than seeing the things he couldn't do that others could, he looked at what he could do that others couldn't. Rather than writing himself off, he keeps taking those steps forward. Rather than seeing volleyball as meaningless, he realized it didn't need some grand meaning. The excitement and pride he felt was more than enough, to the point where, even after a pretty gnarly and probably demonetizing injury, he's desperate to get back on the court. The whole time he was sitting out, there was only one thing on his mind despite the pain. how do I beat Ushiwaka? How do we beat this ridiculous monster? And you can't force yourself to think about something. There's only two times your brain will naturally obsess over something: when it's worrying and when it's exciting. It's clear which one this is. Tsukishima's plan works. Switching up the blocking strategy, they'd use all game to catch Ushiwaka off guard. And although he still managed to hit a ridiculous spike, Karasuno get the ball back in the air for Hinata to slam home the winning point. But whilst the glory of that final point goes to Hinata, the MVP of the match is recognized both by Ukai and even Shiro Torizawa's coach to be Tsukishima, who at last got his smile back. Obviously, this isn't the end of his journey, but I think the rest of his story belongs in its own separate video. If I asked you if you wanted freedom, you'd probably say yes. However, a lot of us, myself included, struggle to envision what that actually looks like beyond quitting our jobs, which sure would be nice, but I think there's something more important. So in this video, I'm going to focus on a side of freedom that is accessible to us all. The freedom that comes through skill as well as physical and mental strength. The idea that being good means being free. It's a line that comes up repeatedly throughout Haikyuu across a number of characters, with its first appearance, I believe, being from Yamaguchi and his discussion with Shimada, which gives us a very similar quote: "To truly enjoy sports, you have to be strong." So obviously the example here is sports, but it applies to everything. Taking care of your health gives you the freedom to actually do the things you want to, instead of being held back because you don't feel great or you're tired. Practicing your social skills gives you the freedom to speak to whoever you want. Having the discipline to stick with things when times get tough gives you the freedom to pursue and actually achieve whatever it is you want to. And that last one is the focus of Haikyuu. We see it in a lot of different characters, but the one I want to focus on today is Hoshiyume. I'm going to run through some parts of his backstory, and you'll see how that all ties into that line, in particular, the mental side of it. Hoshiyume has been obsessed with volleyball since a very, very young age, and yet sadly ended up being the only short king in a family of giants. He's had to watch everyone around him surpass him in an instant. First with his older brother, who just walked into a training session and hit a great spike on his first try. And as someone who's been playing volleyball for maybe 3 months now, and to be honest, still can't do that, even remotely consistently, to be able to do that on your first try is very impressive, and just seems to hammer home the point to Hoshiyume that he's born without. Years on, this only becomes more extreme, as after playing for close to a decade by this point, he's now got competition for his spot from someone who's only been playing for a year, from a player who embodies that unfairness of the world and whose name I can't really pronounce, Gao Hakuba. He stands at 6'8", which makes him the tallest in the series, just ahead of Yakuzawa. He's seemingly gifted with natural strength, and whilst he's certainly not Hoshiyume's level yet, there's a pretty huge difference here in that Hoshiyume spent the entirety of middle school on the bench, which, forgive me if I'm wrong here, it's a bit different in the UK, but if he started in 2nd grade and didn't play until high school, I think that's 8 years on the bench, whereas Gao seems to become a starting player for a very strong team almost instantly. So what does any of this have to do with that line? Well, let's go back to when he was a bit younger. Spending years on the bench the way he did, it would have been extremely easy for him to have simply stopped playing volleyball, to have allowed his height to dictate that he simply couldn't do the thing he wanted. Instead, he opted for a different path, to find the freedom found through strength, practicing everything and anything he could relentlessly, which is something else I want to talk about, because being short, he knew that there were some things simply inaccessible to him, and so he accepted his weaknesses. He ignored the weapons he couldn't wield and instead focused on all the ones he could, carefully, persistently, honing them all to a wicked point. As one of, if not the most well-rounded player in the series, Hoshiyume practiced everything, not just spiking, but receiving, serving, and most notably, setting. Now, of course, everyone does practice everything, but he took it to another level entirely. Rather than simply being things that he has to be able to do, he instead turned them into potent weapons. For example, he didn't just get good at overhand passes, he got amazing at them. to the point where he can reliably set no matter where he is on the court. In doing so, he gained the freedom to stay on there. However, as cringy and cheesy as it sounds, the greatest strength, which offers the greatest freedom, is linked to what we were just talking about. And it's to be able to have faith in your own wings, not the ones you wish you had or the ones you had of other people. This is something I've always struggled with, and I won't lie, I still do. I definitely still do. From my physique to my channel to my job to my flat, I've always found myself constantly comparing myself down to the tiniest detail, and it really zaps all enjoyment of whatever it is you're doing. But if we're talking about actual freedom here, having the strength to not compare yourself to others gives you the freedom to actually feel good about yourself, to be proud of your progress and happy of how you're doing. And for Hinata, this was something that had bugged him ever since he first joined Karasuno and was labelled the greatest decoy. It wasn't what he wanted. He thought it was uncool and he wanted to be able to spike like the taller players he saw. But with time, he realised that Hinata Shoyo, standing on the court, is far more important to him than whether he's called the greatest decoy or the little giant, or whether he even has a nickname. In the same way Hoshiyumi discarded the weapons he couldn't wield, Hinata not only did the same, but also discarded the things which didn't matter to him as much, and in doing so, broke the shackles of being the greatest decoy isn't cool, and most importantly, I wish I was like them. But there's a reason it took him so long to kind of break free of these chains. He had to give his brain some evidence that it actually worked. It's kind of hard to do when you've got zero proof that it's a good idea. To be clear, I'm not saying that you shouldn't, in fact, you should. I've just always found it personally quite hard. But by this point in the story, he'd already beaten some pretty huge names and played a major part himself in doing so. He'd seen the proof that he could reach the same heights as anyone else, literally in his jumping and metaphorically in his future career. And in this match here, against the modern day little giant who's already reached Japan's youth camps, Hinata fully has faith in himself. And Hoshiyumi had done the same too. Rather than letting his height get him down, he simply accepted that there was nothing he could do about it. But this idea goes way beyond volleyball, and there's one player in particular I think really embodies this idea in the real world, Yu Nishinoya. However, I'm going to pass things over to someone a lot of you likely know for that, but do be warned, there will be manga spoilers beyond this point.
Hey everyone, it's Annie Essays, and I'm here to talk about Nishinoya with regards to the line, being strong means being free. In the post-time skip match between the Jackals and Adlers, Furodate puts a thematic stamp on the idea that being good means being free through the reintroduction of Nishinoya. During this match, we see many of our favorite characters reunite, with one exception. Noya is nowhere to be seen. Near the end of the first set, Asahi clues us in to what he's been up to, living off the coast of Italy, fishing for marlins. After high school, Noya chose to pursue a life of adventure instead of one on the court. Throughout the story, Noya has been the embodiment of playing freely. As libero of an offensive-minded team, Noya allowed his teammates to play without the fear of getting blocked. Outside of the Inurazaki match, Noya brought a fearlessness and free perspective to every game. He extends his freedom to his choice of career, foregoing expectations of becoming a professional athlete and instead pursuing a life on the open sea. Noya's decision to quit volleyball and the way he handled himself on the court shows how expectations and fear deeply connect to a person's ability to become free. If you are one of the most talented high school volleyball players like Noya, you are expected to become a professional athlete because athletes are held in such high regard. It's seen as a waste of potential if you don't go pro despite being talented enough to do so. The same expectations for how you should live your life applies to the style in which you are expected to play. Small small players are liberos, and the tallest are middle blockers. Furodate toys with our expectations of players all the time in Haikyuu. After Noya's reintroduction, he highlights the uniqueness of the Jackal's playstyle, first with Bokudo's unorthodox but now signature chest receive, followed by an Atsumu setter dump, with the chapter ending as Hinata fakes a spike into a set. The freest players on the court always play at the highest level because they are not bound by the strategies of their opponents. You can't back them into a corner because there is always another direction to go. They're not limited by what you think they might do and always make the best choices for themselves. That is captured in the panel at the end of this chapter, with Noya standing on the edge of the sea, paired with Hinata's surprise set. So much of Haikyuu's story explores how volleyball reflects real life. The lessons learned on the court give the players a foundation for making difficult choices. The freedom we see Noya play with flows into his willingness to set aside the career path most would have chosen and follow what his heart tells him to do. He is able to journey across the world, literally, because he tackles fear head on. Noya is no stranger to fear, as clearly shown in the match against Inarizaki. Atsumu puts Noya's receiving skills to the test by getting the better of him with his jump floats. So far in the story, Noya had never shown fear, taking on Date Tech and Shiratorizawa with confidence, empowering his teammates to overcome their own trepidations. Atsumu has the skill to challenge the weakest part of Noya's game, overhand receives, and he targets Noya relentlessly, hoping to break Kurasuno's Guardian. Furodate plants the seed for Nishinoya's journey to Italy in this match. Noya tells everyone about his childhood, how for the longest time he was scared of everything, but his grandfather made sure to put him out of his comfort zone, assuring him that if something gets too scary, your friends will be able to help you through it. Noya overcomes his fear of Atsumu through the help of Kinoshita, and gets back to his free style of play. Years later, Noya's decision to move across the world is rooted in that fearlessness. Through the trial and errors of competition, Noya built a foundation to accept fear and try new things, something all of us can learn to apply to our own lives. The difference between good players and great ones is often fear. Good players have preconceived ideas about the talent levels of themselves and their opponents. They are expected to play within a certain style, and if they fail to score or make a receive, then a substitute will be on the way. Great players avoid that mindset, never focusing on the consequences of failure, but on the results if they succeed. Great players shatter expectations on their way to reaching new levels of skill. If you're too focused on what might happen if you fail, then how could you be expected to succeed? Noya's example throughout Haikyuu shows the importance of finding freedom within your life. It comes from minimizing fear, relying on friends, and always trying out new things. Don't allow your life to be dictated by the expectations of what others want you to do, and instead focus on yourself. Noya depicts this level of freedom in spite of playing the most restricted position on the court. He isn't allowed to play offense, but that doesn't hold him back from empowering his teammates to spike each ball with full confidence, because even if it takes using his foot to make it happen, Noya finds a way to make the receive. For Hinata, he embraced freedom by traveling to Brazil, building up his body and making sure he could fill any role on the court. For Nishinoya, his freedom was found on the coast of Italy, a life at sea where he literally has the freedom to go in any direction he pleases. Getting good means breaking the shackles of expectations and fear, and taking life in a direction you want it to go. All of us want to be good, and we have to look no further than Noya to see how sports can help us achieve that.
Huge thank you to Annie Essays for his segment. So to finish off the video, I just wanted to say that once you've heard this line, you'll start to notice it everywhere. I gave some examples earlier, but it really does apply to so much. You know, the stronger your ability to resist distractions, the more time you have. The better you get at something, the more you get to do it. The more confidence you have in yourself, which is typically built up from all sorts of strength, the more comfortable you'll be overcoming the fear to do pretty much anything. And when you put all that together, you get someone like Nishinoya, free to travel and go wherever he wants in the world, picking up whatever job he fancies to get by. So I think the assumption is that the routine of building yourself up is something that's boring. You know, we've all done this. I don't want to do X because it'd be boring, but anyone doing those things knows it simply isn't true. It's actually pretty fun, In particular, the rewards of it are very fun. Whereas by comparison, when you don't have the strength to drop the things harmful to you, you're a prisoner to them. So if you're looking for more freedom, the answer is likely simply getting stronger. Thank you. We've all started something and then quit, and we likely felt pretty guilty about it, right? Sometimes that guilt is quite valid and you shouldn't be giving up just yet, but you've heard all that before. However, there's situations where that isn't the case, where quitting as such could actually be really beneficial for you. And there's a couple characters in Haikyuu that go into this idea in a really interesting way. So I'm going to start with one who hasn't been introduced to the anime so far, but we won't need to go into any actual spoilers for the match. Seiichiro Hiragami, the immovable, stands at a towering 6'3" and is regarded as the cornerstone of one of the strongest blocking teams in the whole nation. He gives Karasuno's ace a hellish time, and even Hinata's freak quick attack doesn't particularly faze him. In chapter 351, we get a look inside his head and at his past. Right after Karasuno's score off of a synchro attack, we see Hiragami laughing about how their attack is annoying. His teammates talk about how nothing seems to faze him at all, but we soon see that this wasn't always the case, and so he responds with, "I guess that's because I learned how to let things go." He talks about how his whole family all went to big name volleyball schools, which the whole situation of parents kind of pushing you down a certain path is an interesting one, because I think the natural assumption a lot of people have is that it's a bad thing and that they're forcing the kid into it. But whilst I can't talk about anything from my own experience, I think it's worth pointing out that there's people out there like Ushiwaka who would definitely disagree with that. So I don't think it's as simple as, yeah, that's bad. But obviously Hiragami is probably an example of it going too far. So he starts playing volleyball at a very young age, and with his height and genetics, he's naturally great at it, right? And most notably, he says that he really enjoys it as well. So he goes straight to the strongest local team's school. Nothing too surprising so far. But then we start to see him training and talking about how he not only wants to get better, he wants all his hits to score, all his serve to score, all of his passes to be on target. There's obviously not a single player alive who can do any one of those things, let alone all three, right? Not even Hoshiyumi, who's regarded as a monster at every aspect of the sport. Anyway, when Hiragami gets to go into his first practice match, he relentlessly apologizes for every tiny little mistake. I'm assuming he made quite a lot of mistakes as well, as he ends up getting swapped out for a different player. And so following this match, he vows to never make a mistake, never mess up, never let anyone outdo him, never get left behind. But following training, we see him sadly plodding along, whilst the bright-eyed Hoshiyumi trains, seeming to really enjoy himself. The next day, he gets back to it, and we see a very clever little panel where his volleyball books are all but covering his entire photo. That younger, happier version of him has nearly completely been taken over by the very thing that used to bring him so much joy. The seasons pass, and on the surface, it looks as though his hard work is paying off. He wins an award for being an outstanding athlete, but if you look at his eyes, there's no light, let alone joy in them. When we saw him training before, he has this glimmer in his eyes, this excitement for the future. But now he doesn't even look that happy. It's more of a, yeah, this is mine, as I deserved type of look. To me, it seems more as though he'd be devastated if he didn't get it, but actually getting it does very, very little for him, which is a horrid place to be, and as good of a justification as any for what follows. So the next day, he overhears a teammate talking about how he's been struggling lately, that he's having an off day in a slump, to which Hiragami thinks about how he just doesn't agree with that, claiming that there's only one reason you don't get results, and that's because you didn't try hard enough. It's kind of similar to Kita's philosophy. However, I think the key difference here is that Kita saw it as more of a, if I wanted more, I could begin to do these things I see other people do. Whereas Hiragami is more looking at it from an angle of, why didn't you do that? It's your fault, what's wrong with you? He's really beating himself up. So whilst they both have a similar idea of your results equals your actions. Obviously, one sees it from a far more balanced, optimistic view, and the other sees it from a very unhealthy, critical angle. But I think the other key part here is Keaton never said mistakes wouldn't happen. He said that you shouldn't be nervous, as there's no reason you wouldn't be able to do in a game what you did in practice. But he acknowledges that it doesn't mean everything will go the way you expect. And we see that when he does make a mistake, he's able to quickly move past it. By comparison, Hiragami's fear of making mistakes and expectation for himself that he'd never make any is what seems to have him so flustered and panicking in matches. Going back to his training, in the very next panel we see him say, "I don't like them," referring to his teammates, followed by his eyes looking very, very different to anything we've seen so far. It's as though he didn't like the realization that follows, that yeah, it's pretty weird for someone who doesn't like having teammates to play a team sport. His trail of thoughts is never finished as he goes off to do more serving, seemingly distracting himself from his thoughts. So with the national qualifiers coming up, he reflects on how his defense is still inadequate, to him anyway, and how he needs to make sure he doesn't mess up. However, when they lose the following game, which seems to be in part due to him overanalyzing a bit, he really puts himself down. He's quite relentlessly apologizing to his teammates, who say that there was nothing that could be done. And it's probably true, they're probably right. Again, there isn't a single player in volleyball history who's made every single block. So he reflects on his mistakes, which, that's a fine thing to do, but you should also reflect on the things you did well and take pride on them. There's a line from Takeda earlier in the series where he talks to Ukai about how it's important to tell the students when they're doing something well, not just badly. I'm sure everyone would agree with that, and if they were talking to someone else, they would do exactly that. But how often do you do that with yourself? Do you say, yeah, I did that well actually, I'm proud of myself for doing that, I did a good job at that? Neither of us do that anywhere near as often as we should, right? And no doubt sometimes we're like Hiragami and just never do that. In fact, it doesn't seem like he's done that once in his entire volleyball career. So we see him walking along, reflecting on his mistakes, and blaming his hands. I suppose in his head he knows what he should be doing. He has this vision, right? But his body just isn't able to match it. Again, not very surprising because he's expecting his body to do everything perfectly every single time. Regardless, he says that he hates his hands as a result, and then starts scraping his knuckles against the wall to make them bleed. Which, correct me if I'm wrong, but besides Kageyama getting a nosebleed after being hit in the face against Jizenji, which was, a pretty unserious scene, I think this is the only time in Haikyuu where we see blood. Right, so before Hoshiumi's reaction to this, what caused him to go from finding volleyball fun to hating himself so much that for making a few mistakes, he would do this to himself? The sport is now the reason he's doing this. So for one, whilst we don't see too much about his early volleyball days, it's probably fair to assume that he didn't see it through the lens of just counting his mistakes the way he does now. So he's got this mental list of, this needs to happen or I can't enjoy it, which already isn't great, but his list is impossible for him to ever obtain. And honestly, I think the other part is, whilst he's clearly extremely good, it's not as though he's overwhelmingly good at it anymore. At first he was likely a very big fish in a very small pond, so he was able to just brush aside his opponents with ease. So, of course he had the confidence that he'd go pro and be a world star. But now he's starting to realize what trying to reach that kind of level is actually like. And he just doesn't like it enough to put all that effort in. So he's putting all this relentless effort in for something which not only does he not enjoy at all, but it doesn't seem like he ever will. And so Hoshiumi just looks at him and says, well, why don't you just quit? It's one of the last lines I would have expected from him, and that's exactly the point. He'd never even considered the idea that he could quit before, that he could stop playing volleyball. The fact that you can stop at any time and still be alright is super relieving. because if you really think you can't stop, then you're effectively a prisoner to it, right? So instead you should be chasing whatever you are because you want to. And you don't even have to stop entirely. You know, if need be for whatever reason, you could stop for a bit. And it's not as though everything you've built up is just going to vanish. You know, in fact, in some cases, it might even do you some good. And so Hiragami says that whilst quitting may raise a set of other problems, presumably this means discussing it with his family, but just knowing he has the option to quit if he wants or needs to made it feel as though the whole world had opened up to him, as though he'd finally found his freedom alongside his fellow seagull, Hoshiyume. Now, I spoke a lot more about this in my video on Mark Snuffy from Blue Lock, which you should check out afterwards if you found this one interesting, but not feeling as though you have any choice but to keep going and put impossible pressure on yourself to never make even the slightest mistake is a great way to stop enjoying whatever it is very, very quickly. Whereas when we return to present day, we see him looking a lot happier, and rather than those dark and empty eyes he had when he was overtraining, or those almost sort of frightened hollow ones he had when he had these realizations he didn't want to accept, his eyes now look perfectly normal. It's fine if he makes a mistake. It's fine if he decides to stop playing volleyball. None of these things will be the end of the world. And funnily enough, on the opposite side of the net, Asahi is going through pretty much the exact same thing, and talks about how his fear of making a mistake caused him to stop enjoying volleyball too. However, he deserves his own separate video. So instead I want to finish the video by briefly talking about a different character, one who's arguably the best player in the series who doesn't continue with volleyball after graduating. And yes, I know there's another contender for that spot, but please don't spoil that in the comments. Anyway, Osamu is clearly an extremely skilled player. Although he wasn't quite selected for the National Youth Camp, it's pretty clear that he's not miles off that level, right? And yet, he decides that he doesn't want to keep playing volleyball after high school. The realization seems to come during his match against Karasuno, where he sees that endless, fiery passion Hinata has for volleyball and realizes that he just doesn't have that. He just doesn't enjoy it as much as others, and more importantly, as much as he loves food. Now, this would not have been an easy decision to make, and this is something I've gone through myself. You know, when you're good at something you decide it's not for you, a lot of people will try and talk you out of it, and they can be very convincing when they do. In particular, of course, his twin Atsumu. And so the two end up deciding to have a competition over who ends up happier, which, okay then, that's the Mia twins for you, I guess. But the point of this video is, it simply wouldn't be right to write him off as a quitter, because there's a huge difference between quitting because you're lazy or scared, and not continuing for something because it's just no longer resourceful to you. This is very clearly the latter. And so I want to share this comment from a viewer, which is one of the best comments I've ever received, which is only quit on a good day. That way you'll know it's not for you. That way you won't spend the rest of your life wondering, oh, what if, or wishing you'd carried it on, because you'll know that that decision wasn't influenced by frustration or a lack of guts. Now, of course, if you're in Hiragami's situation and you've seemingly not had a good day for years, then maybe that doesn't apply. But I think it's a great comment regardless. So, as mentioned in other videos, I do think you should always give everything enough time to get some level of competence at it before quitting, as a big part of the fun of anything is getting good at it. It's also important to note that no matter what it is, it's going to have aspects you don't like as much, and you're going to have times where it isn't quite as fun. But if you've been thinking about it for a while, and you can honestly say to yourself that it's not for you, then maybe it served its purpose. It doesn't mean it was a waste, you know, you don't spend your whole life doing something for it to be worthwhile. For example, Kita's last words before he walks out of that stadium are, "I'm not playing volleyball anymore after high school, so does that mean I'm just going to vanish?" With the answer obviously being no. And that even if he didn't get to win, he got to build up a lot of muscle, which is always great, and now feels like he can take on anything the world throws at him, which all links into my favourite part of Hinata's story about how these kind of situations can benefit you in the oddest way down the line, but If you've ever felt like you want or need to be doing something, but can't seem to bring yourself to do so, or if you find yourself playing games way beyond the point of them actually still being fun, then this is the video for you. Because effort is fun. It really is, when you look at it the right way. But sometimes the easier, low resistance path draws us in regardless. And after this video, thanks to Kenma, hopefully you'll be a bit more excited about choosing the seemingly harder path. Because here's something I want you to think about quickly. Obviously, Kenma being a gamer, do you think if you got thrown into the final boss of a game, throughout the whole journey leading up to it, would it be anywhere near as meaningful? Would it be anywhere near as fun to fight or exciting to beat? In my experience, and as with all my videos, it's just my experience, fun, as in real fun, not just passing time, kinda has to be earned, to be worked towards. And I think Kenma does a brilliant job of showing this. So our first introduction to him comes from Hinata getting lost on a training run, where we get quite the interesting contrast between our volleyball obsessed Hinata and Kenma, who just doesn't really care about volleyball. Not in the same way as Tsukishima, who kind of wants to love volleyball but just has issues to sort out, or Yamaguchi had to build up a level of skill first to really start to enjoy it. Kenma just doesn't seem to care that much. We find out later on that his friend got him into it when he was younger, and he just kind of carried on. I guess it just became part of his routine, you know? On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I have volleyball, or whatever days they're trained on. But in spite of his indifference towards it, he still gets frustrated when he loses. He always makes sure he finishes his training, and he still continues to turn up. And that's all very normal, honestly. That exact situation is something I'm sure a lot of us can relate to, except we maybe enjoyed our weekly school club a little bit more than he does. For me, it was swimming and running, right? But especially when you're younger, you know, he's only in high school, it takes time to figure out exactly what it is you enjoy. And you have to give things a chance too. You know, if you're just jumping from one thing to the next because you don't enjoy it right away, you'll never really give anything enough time to see if you really like it or not. In a lot of anime and films and whatnot, the main character tries something once and instantly falls in love with it and does it for the rest of their life. And I think that's a big part of where this whole find your purpose deal comes from. But that's not always what happens in reality. You know, sometimes it takes a little while, so don't feel as though something isn't right for you just because you didn't enjoy it the first couple times. Although, by the sounds of it, he does actually quite like the sport itself, in particular the mental side of it. But he gets put off by having to get out of breath and sweaty, which unfortunately for him, the team he is on, is infamous for making their matches twice as tiring and long as other teams due to their very solid defense and incredible teamwork, but quite average offense. His team does account for his lack of stamina and guts, with their exceptional receives, which they pinpoint his exact location, so he doesn't really have to move around. But regardless, it's worth pointing out that the enjoyment he gets from volleyball does come with some inevitable discomfort. It's again pretty rare that you'll find anything that doesn't contain some aspect you don't like. Again, that doesn't mean it's not the right thing for you. And we see this in how as soon as he steps onto the court, he seems to be super level-headed and focused, which just isn't something you can do for something you have no interest in. As anyone who's ever tried to study for a subject, they really don't care about no's. He loves the mental side of the game, it's just the physical effort he doesn't particularly like. But following his conversation with Hinata, for seemingly the very first time, he's looking forward to the upcoming match, which I think is just purely due to Hinata's infectious, pure love of volleyball. The match rolls around and Nekoma end up winning. Afterwards, when Hinata asks him how it felt to win, he responds with just sort of normal, which interestingly directly goes against Karu and Nekomata's concept of lowering the net that I really agree with. The summary is, the first and most important thing is to teach someone how fun it is to succeed at something. So when he sees Karu saying the nets are too high for him, he lowers it to enable him to do so. And I think this is absolutely true. A big part of enjoying anything is getting better at it. It's incredibly frustrating when you're trying something new and it's been a little while, but you've still not managed to do anything successfully. But that joy of success, when you do reach it is what makes it fun. I think Yamaguchi is the best example of this, admitting he didn't enjoy it in season 1, and later, after his mentor Shimada told him, you need to be strong to have fun, and obviously getting stronger, he clearly greatly enjoys himself in season 2. Feeling skilled at something is a brilliant feeling, one which is well worth all the effort it takes to get there. But it doesn't really seem to be the case for Kenma. Given his frustration at losing, I imagine he does at least feel something when he wins. And again, if you really didn't care at all, I doubt he'd be able to focus on winning the way he does. But winning and getting strong hasn't unlocked any sort of love for volleyball. He just seems to want to play until the end of high school and leave it there. And you know what? That's absolutely fine. He's given it a real solid go. He never gave up with it. And he's found in the end it's just not really for him. Fine. But so many people feel as though they have nothing to do, but they're not willing to actually try things and figure out what they like. No one else is going to figure it out for you. You know, if you want to enter that awful feeling of just drifting through each day without anything that actually feels meaningful, you know, you go to bed and just have that uncomfortable feeling that you should have spent your day differently. The thing is, you can't just wait for it to fall in your lap. Your purpose as such probably isn't going to drop in your lap one day. It might do, but probably not. You have to try things out, and sometimes that can be a bit scary or awkward and it doesn't quite feel right initially. But as you try more and more things, you'll start to get a sense for what you really enjoy and what you want your life to look like. It takes time. You know, it's only really in the last year or so I've started to somewhat figure out myself, coming up to 25 in a few months. It's tough, and I think that's a big part of why young guys in particular, very relevant to Kenma here, will simply spend all day playing video games. You know that part of the start about playing video games way beyond it being fun? I've mentioned this in a different video, but my routine before this channel was just playing games all day. I'd go to the gym, but that was the only other thing I would do. And to be honest, I didn't really enjoy it. I'd play a game for 10 hours when I stopped enjoying it after the first 2. After 4 or 5 hours, I'd have this quiet frustration within me that wanted to be doing something else, but just didn't really know what. And the problem is, even if you do know what else you want to do, it's so much easier to load up a game than is to go and sign up for a sports club, or learn to play an instrument, or to start a YouTube channel. I don't know. That was it for me. And so there's a line which wasn't in the movie, but I think really sums up that whole side tangent I went on, which is sometimes the path that seems harder is actually easier. Or in this case, the path which seems less fun is actually more fun. Because I'm not bashing video games, right? I spend maybe 5 hours a week on a Minecraft server with me and my friends, right? But I promise you, the most fun you will have in your life is not video games. I promise you. And I always used to hate when I was younger and my parents told me to spend less time on the games and more time outside or whatever, because I always thought to myself, whoa, but I enjoy doing this. But they were absolutely right. I really wish I'd started something like this channel, or actually started the volleyball a month back. And if you don't know what else to do but want to try something, literally any sport is probably your best place to start looking. But that's a separate video. But as someone who really looks back and seriously regrets the amount of times I spent on video games, I hope at least one young man or woman decides to take up something that isn't gaming because of this. Anyway, back to Kenma, although that was obviously all pretty relevant to him, because although he didn't find this match in particular any more exciting than the previous matches, he later on in season 2 says to Hinata that he wants to play a match where it's instantly game over once someone loses. And the best explanation I've got for this is that he wants final boss Hinata rather than training Hinata, which is super interesting because he seems quite lazy to everyone else, but he really does love that challenge. He loves to be pushed to his limits, his mental ones at least, and in his words, beating a game is sadder than any game over. He'd rather lose than lack a challenge, and it goes back to what I was saying before about just how much it sucks to feel like you have nothing to do every time you wake up. But now he does have a goal, and it's later pointed out by his team that he's been considerably more motivated ever since. However, his showdown with Hinata will have to wait. Nekoma make it through to qualifiers and clear the first round, but in their second round, they end up against what's probably the worst team Kenma could have imagined for an opponent, a team just like Nekoma. Led by a former student of their own coach, Sarakawa Tech are another solid defensive team, meaning this was going to be a stupidly long match. To make matters even worse, they're fully aware that Kenma's weakness is in his stamina, and so at the cost of the occasional rally and even being willing to throw the first set, rather than going in for the kill every time, they'll often instead go for a hit that Kenma can just about receive if he really goes for it. It doesn't take long for this to seriously wear him down, and he seems to hit the limit of his stamina. Nekoma begin to fall behind as a result, but in the final rally, he pushes himself to take that extra step, putting up a beautiful set that catches everyone else off guard, and allowing Nekoma to win the game. When his teammates asked him about it afterwards, he says it was partly due to wanting to pay his teammates back for the extra work they put in for him, and also partly because he recognised that putting in that extra step was a lot less work than playing an extra set would be. Once again, it's that whole idea of what seems to be the harder path is often a lot easier. It was only a single step followed by a single jump, but to Kenma, being as exhausted as he was at the time, that was a huge deal. And then of course, moving on to Karasuno vs Nekoma. Now obviously if you haven't seen the Battle of the Garbage Dump movie yet, and still want to remain unspoiled for it, you're going to want to click off the video at this point. Thank you very much for stopping by though. Now, I'm actually going to skip for a pretty huge chunk of the match, just simply because I originally wrote the script going through it all, and I just felt myself repeating a lot of what I've already said. So, you know, the way he gets totally lost in a match whilst devising a plan to shut down Hinata, his disappointment when it works and it feels like he's beating the game, we've kind of gone through all of that already. But what I really want to focus on is how it all leads to one particularly intense rally. The rivalry between Hinata and Kenma has gotten increasingly intense throughout the match. And of course, the two players are polar opposites, with Hinata having all the stamina, athleticism, and above all passion that Kenma lacks, and Kenma having the brains and foresight that Hinata lacks. Of course, Hinata had steadily been developing his game sense for a while now, and in this rally, for the first time he pretends to dink, knowing Kenma would spot it, baiting him in forward before pushing the ball to the back. It's a level of forward planning and mind games we hadn't seen too much of from Hinata until now. You know, he'd had his receive where he used the path of Aaron to predict where I was going to go, but this really feels like a Kenma strategy. And likewise, when we look over at Kenma, who's collapsed on the floor after struggling to get himself back up, for the first time, he says, "That was fun," much to Hinata's excitement. But that moment of joy didn't just come from one rally, or even this one match. It was the years of playing volleyball, building himself up and developing his skills up to put to the test against a very worthy rival, Hinata and the rest of Karasuno. And it's not the end of it either. In the final rally of the game, for the very first time, the quiet-spoken Kenma not only yells at his teammates, but even insults him, completely ablaze with excitement, as he thinks to himself, "I'm hurt, I'm exhausted, but I don't ever want this to end." Tanaka's line shot is received and goes high above Kenma, giving him a moment to briefly reflect on all their training matches together. But as the ball falls down, the sweat on it and his hands causes it to slip through his fingers. And I think that's as good a proof as any that he gave this match absolutely everything he had. And his complete lack of frustration or self-pity shows that he knew that too. For once, he doesn't seem to hate losing. And the next bit he says is something that's played in my head quite a bit since I first read it. It's easy to overcomplicate things, or I mean, maybe this next part is just me, but sometimes I feel like there's this pressure from somewhere, social media probably, I don't know. But sometimes it feels like there's this pressure that everything I do has to be part of some grand scheme or result in some grand accomplishment. You know, be something that I could show the world or anyone who asks and say, "Yup, look what I accomplished there." But something about Kenma's closing speech here lifted a lot of that for me. No matter which of us lost or which of us won, no one was going to die. No one's coming back to life either. Evil won't flourish across the land. The world won't be destroyed. It isn't like we had a grand adventure across a sprawling fantasy world. We just ran in circles in a rectangle 18 meters wide, trying desperately hard to make a ball hit the floor in one spot and not another. And it was the most fun I've had in my life. Thanks for teaching me volleyball, Karu. I like it. Wow. That part I've said throughout about not feeling like you have anything to do. I'm sure there's at least a portion of you watching that actually do have an idea of what you want to do, but it doesn't feel important enough. And you should just throw that out the window. You'll regret not doing so sooner. Anyway, to finish off, you might be thinking what I just said kind of contradicts the earlier parts about not playing video games all day. Now, if you genuinely do enjoy that and feel satisfied by it, then maybe that's a different story. But it seems to far more often than not simply be a substitute for not knowing what else to do. Of course, without going into spoilers, we do know Kenma continues to be a big gaming fan into adulthood. But the key part is, it's also not at all the only thing he's doing. He's clearly become a lot more willing to try some new things, see what he thinks about them, and stick with them until he becomes good at them. I also used to think that I had nothing else to do, and now I have way too many things that I want to do, and I should try and narrow things down a bit. But once you do the same as Kenma, you realize that there's a huge, beautiful world out there for you, and the most fun you have in it will be a fun that you earn for yourself. Thank you very much for watching this far. A word is going to be a slightly controversial video, but again, everything I say here is just my own experience. So I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to subscribe if so, and I'll see you again soon. You probably have at least one character that you could say changed your life in some way. Personally, I have quite a few, but by far, the one with the least screen time is this guy. And I know I'm not alone in this. Implementing the mindset he has made me feel almost superhuman. I've just had this feeling of peace. I get things done so much easier than I used to. And certain things that used to stress me out just don't anymore. And hopefully all of that will apply to you as well by the end of this video. Now, if you haven't watched this series, you don't need to for this video, nor will I try to convince you to watch it. But Haikyuu's Shinsuke Kita is a character you'll wish you heard about soon. Before I get to his genuinely life-changing lines, I'm going to very quickly run through his introduction to the series. The match between our protagonist team Karasuno and Kita's team Inurazaki is one of the most intense, moving arcs I've ever seen. It feels like a battle of life and death, with several of my all-time favourite scenes. It was so intense that there was something I didn't actually notice immediately. Inurazaki's captain is missing. In my head, I subconsciously put Miya Atsumu as their captain, but no one on their side is wearing the #1 shirt. Karasuno win the first set, and yet there's still no sign of Inurazaki's captain. If he is there, then for whatever reason he's not on the starting lineup. Going into the second set, Inurazaki have a huge lead. However, as they start to get near the end of the set, little mistakes start to pile up. Their frustration builds, and before they know it, Karasuno have closed the gap significantly thanks to multiple service aces from Kageyama. And then it happens. Shinsuke is finally joining the match, and we see that #1 shirt. Karasuno are understandably on guard. I mean, this is the captain after all. But Shinsuke thinks to himself, I'm just a placeholder. You don't need to be scared of me. Very humble words for the captain of a team dubbed the Ultimate Challengers, ranked second in Japan. But whilst he's not a standout player, he just has this presence. Immediately it's noted that it doesn't feel like Karasuno's usual players will work anymore. But of course, if you've seen my videos before, you know I'm not here just to talk about his skill as a player. The first of his many brilliant lines is one I actually wrote down on a whiteboard I have next to me to remind myself of every day, and it's one I genuinely believe is life-changing to follow. You do it right, and you do it every day. You take care of your body, you tidy up after yourself, you practice gratitude, and you practice. Because doing stuff right just feels good. If that was a lot simpler than you're expecting, well, that's kind of the point. We don't need any other reason besides it feels good, genuinely good. It feels good to take care of yourself. It feels good to take care of your environment. It feels good to practice and work on something. And if you do all of those every day, you'll feel great. The usual self-care advice of bubble baths and treating yourself to some sweet food, it just never really worked for me. I never really felt any better by the end of it. For me, the truest, best way to look after yourself is to do stuff right. You don't need motivation or discipline or anything. It's fun when you allow it to be. And the more thorough you are, the more pride you take in it, the more fun it becomes. And we really shouldn't see ourselves as above these small things. To wake up and do something for your body, to make good food, to go for a walk, even just sitting outside in the sun for a bit, to tidy or clean some part of your house, to verbally express gratitude for something, that's all you have to do. And you'll be amazed how different you feel after, and how much you actually enjoy doing it. That's why Kita does all of this for volleyball, despite not planning to take it too seriously or even play at all past graduation. It's why he's still trained and was so diligent. Even when he was so far off the starting lineup, he wasn't even given a uniform. That didn't matter to him. It was simply that doing all of this is more fun and feels better than not doing it. And it links really well to his next point. In the last set of the game, with the two teams reaching a deuce, despite all the pressure, Atsumu doesn't let it get to him at all and continues to put up beautiful sets for his team. One of Kita's teammates on the bench then says, "That guy's a genius," and he wishes he had talent too. And the whole talent and hard work deal has been done to death in anime, to the point where it's quite rare to see anyone actually add anything new or valuable to it, but Kita definitely does. He says he was once asked if it was frustrating for him to have such incredible younger teammates, with the implication being that players like Atsumu are just born better than him. But he has the humility that I honestly lacked for so long, to realize that everything I do on a scale of 1 to 10, guys like him do from 1 to 20, or a more effective 10 or a denser 10, sometimes even go from A to Z. There are people you might not be able to beat, and it's natural to look at them and think they're amazing. But if you think they're that good for no reason, not only have you lost before you've even played them, but it's rude. Those two characters that they were looking at, Atsumu and Kageyama, are perfect examples. Atsumu actually started off a weaker player than his twin, but just had that little extra drive and worked relentlessly to catch up to overtake him. And as for Kageyama, there's a line from Hinata which sums it up perfectly. He's an incredible guy, but he's not always been that way. From before I even saw a volleyball, he's been playing. On the days I wanted to play with my friends or the days I wanted to play a new game, he was playing volleyball every single day. To write him off as a natural genius is not only plain rude to how much he's sacrificed to get where he is, but it also ensures you'll never get close to his level. He undoubtedly is a natural at volleyball, but the reason he's as good as he is because he does everything he possibly can. For instance, there's a scene where Date Tech Setter asks Kageyama for some advice and finds out he does fingertip push-ups to strengthen his hands. If he'd just written off Kageyama as naturally better than him, he would have never found that out. Instead, now he's got that little bit closer to his level. And leading on from that is the final thing I took away from Kita. The simple line, "I am built upon the small things I do every day," and the end results are nothing more than a byproduct of that. The reason he's not overly fussed by players like Atsumu taking the spotlight whilst he's on the sidelines is because he's humble enough to realize that they simply do more each day towards progressing in volleyball than he does. But if he did want more, he would simply need to do more, and the results would follow. and we see how strongly Kita believes in this ideal. If we go back to right before he was introduced, towards the end of the second set, Inurazaki sub on their pinch server, a nervous first year who says in middle school he had just one chance to come off the bench, a single serve which he messed up. Not wanting to repeat that, he goes for a very safe, weak serve into Karasuno's half, which is easily received and slammed back by Hinata for a point. And then, for the first time, Inurazaki's crowd boos their own side, much to the confusion of everyone else spectating. As he walks off, Kita tells him we don't need someone who just gets the ball over, whether we're in the lead or not. It sounds so cold at the time, but as we find out more about Kita, we realise that wasn't how he meant it at all. It's more that there was just no need for Risaki to play it that safe. If he was on the team and had been substituted in, his skills had already been recognised. He'd already done the work needed. And so Kita wonders, why does anyone ever get nervous? I guess it's because they feel a need to do more than they currently can. You don't get nervous about eating or cleaning your teeth or going to the bathroom because you do that every day. And he's absolutely right. If you've done it before, why are you doubting you can do it again? Even in situations you can't really perfectly practice for, so for instance a job interview, you can prepare some answers to some common questions, but you're not going to know every single question they ask, so you won't be able to practice for the entire interview. But if you've made it to that stage of the interview, you're clearly qualified enough, so there's no need to try and be more than you already are. I know it's not that easy. Trust me, I use the example of a job interview because I just had one, and even bearing that in mind, I was still nervous, but way less than I'd usually be. And it's not that Kita doesn't try to work on himself or improve, he does that plenty. It's just that if you've prepared, if you've done what you can leading up to the big moment, there's no reason to start doubting yourself. There's no reason to believe that your practice is suddenly going to fail you. Of course, that doesn't mean it's going to go perfectly 100% of the time. He doesn't mean that at all, and we see him miss receives as well, because he's only human, after all. And we also hear that Osamu had a particularly rough time at the previous tournament, despite practicing plenty. Things can go wrong, especially in something like a sport, and it's completely natural to be at least a bit nervous. But I do still think he makes a great point, in that if you've practiced enough, you likely are already enough. Give yourself some credit. So Risaki should have gone all out on his serve because he's got no reason to doubt himself there. We see Daichi going for the exact same thing when he sees Atsumu up to serve. He's been through this plenty of times and got him through it. Sure, there's no guarantee he'll get this one specific serve. He actually did miss the one right before that. But the fact he's practiced this so much is reason enough to have faith in himself. The only reason you would have to worry is if you haven't prepared, you haven't practiced enough. And the beauty is, that's entirely within your control. And of course, the match ends with the Mia twins' new attack they'd never practiced being blocked. And following the match, we see Kita saying goodbye to his teammates, where, along with his earlier conversation with Ojiro, we kind of get the final piece of the puzzle, the one that really balanced out his whole philosophy and also this channel. Going back to when he got his captain's shirt, he's so happy he starts crying, and as he walks home, he talks to Ojiro about how he thinks the process is more important than the results, and he's really internally overanalyzing why he's so happy about getting this uniform, to the point where Ojiro butts in with, who cares about the details? We don't need reasons to be happy. If it makes you happy, it makes you happy. Kita just bursts out laughing, and I didn't think anything of it the first time I saw the scene, but man, Ojiro is so right. Maybe we don't need some grand reason that we can justify on every level. We can be happy about results that won't matter, whatever that means. In the long run, we can be frustrated despite doing everything we can. We can feel exhilarated despite losing. We can feel content just cleaning and practicing. Because however we choose to live, there's always going to be some argument against it. There's no doubt that some people look at Keiji and think, oh, he's not ambitious enough, for instance. And I'm aware of the irony in that I run a whole channel on this kind of thing, but maybe there comes a point where you've just found what works for you. Not to say you should shut yourself off from any other ideas, but something about the scene just made it click for me. If you feel like what you're doing genuinely works for you, don't worry about someone else thinking it's wrong. I think you should at least hear people out, but you don't have to walk around carrying that constant pressure of, I should be living like this instead because this person said that. And obviously that includes me. Like, my intros are always a bit, oh, you won't believe how amazing this character is because I've got to hook people in, right? But if you've listened to this video or any of my other videos and thought, that doesn't really sound like it would work to me, but now I kind of feel pressured to do that. You don't have to, man. And I personally, once I learned to have the confidence in myself that what I was doing works for me, and that's all the reason I need, that's when you start to really feel at peace. And we see this with Kita too, so this is a super minor spoiler, but if you don't want to find out what job Kita does after he graduates, then jump ahead to the time shown on screen. Okay, so we found out earlier that he's the top of his class in everything, so presumably he would have a lot of options for where he wanted to go. Right, and so it's initially a little bit surprising that he chooses to be a rice farmer, because no doubt he would have had plenty of people, especially like teachers, tell him, oh, but you could do this, or don't you want to use your brain for this? But he's evidently just said, nah, this is what I like and it works for me. It's also brilliant in that the field he's looking at is no more or less than the effort he's put in. It's the sum of these small actions he would have done day by day building up. And it's just so beautifully peaceful. It perfectly fits his ideas. But anyway, that was a real rant, so to finish off this video, realistically, a lot of what Kita says is honestly not anything groundbreaking. It's things that are fairly common sense, but expressed in such a way that feels so different. And I think they should be the foundation for everything else. You know, start the day with those things because not only are they more important, but it's hard for the rest of it to go wrong when you start the morning like that. We are nothing more than the sum of our daily actions. To fix anything, fix those. The results are nothing more than a byproduct. 25 minutes. That's all the screen time they had, and yet, despite sharing that with Karasuno, in 1 and a bit episodes, they became an incredibly interesting team. There's something you've likely struggled with before, given the views on the last video I spoke about this topic. But although I've gotten a lot better at it since then, these guys gave me the final piece I couldn't find on my own. Josenji High are Karasuno's first opponents in the main preliminary round at spring playoffs. And up until now, there'd been a lot of focus on teams that play very differently to Karasuno. Datetek's solid blocking, Albajo's high balance, and Nekoma's unending receives. But here, for the first time, they face a team extremely similar to them. Everyone feels like some combination of Hinata and Tanaka. However, they have a truly unique view on volleyball. Unlike everyone else, upon meeting Hinata, and when the game is about to start, it's not we'll win or let's have a good game, but let's have a fun game. They seem more interested in having fun than actually winning. It's not as though they're not playing seriously. It's clear that part of the fun is winning, and that if they weren't winning, they simply wouldn't be having fun. And so Yamaguchi repeats Shimada's earlier words to him. To truly have fun, you need to be strong. Now, that age-old question of how to balance simply enjoying ourselves with whatever our current pursuits and ambitions are is something that's bothered me for a long time now. I often find myself at either extreme end of that spectrum and being unhappy as a result. As I mentioned in this video here, at the time, I was working so hard to the point where it was affecting my health. However, I've also had phases, especially if I go back to before I started this channel, where I wasn't really doing anything. I had that constant awful feeling of I should be doing something right now. But Josenji gave me a really good framework for finding a good middle ground, which I'll come back to. Now, as a team, they're reckless, disorganized, and definitely have their flaws, but they also have some crazy attacks and are clearly a very skilled team. So what's the difference between them and Karasuno? A lot of their players would honestly fit in quite well with Karasuno's attacks, and vice versa. But their captain in particular is very aware of Daichi, who's clearly the kind of player their team lacks. And in the second set, he says to Hinata, "Your captain is good, but he's boring." When asked why he thinks that, he doesn't have an actual answer. And this is a small thing before I get on with the rest of the video, but I'm sure we've all done this before, where we write something off as boring, even though it'd actually be super beneficial for us if we did it. For me, it was, well, I don't want to write and follow a strict gym plan because that would be boring. I just want to turn up and do whatever. And I wasn't saying that out of laziness. There wasn't actually a real reason for it. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's done that. You shouldn't be so quick to write things off as boring. And to go back to volleyball, why did Jozenji write off practicing receives as boring? There really isn't any reason. And they seem to realize that as they watched Daichi and Nishinoya. I guarantee once they went home and practiced a few receives, as soon as they started to see some progress in them, they would have found it as fun as spiking. Not just because it enables them to spike and play more, but also because the only reason they likely found it boring was because they didn't fully see the benefits of it. As their old captain said, to play you first need a playground. And of course to spike and set, you first need a receive. I've honestly found how much fun you can have to often be limited by how much boring stuff you're willing to do. Unfortunately, it's just impossible to enjoy something all the time. No matter how much you enjoy something, we'll inevitably have periods where it just kind of stops being fun for a while. And even when it is fun, there's always that one part you don't enjoy, or at least don't enjoy it as much, but pushing it to one side or neglecting it often comes back to bite you. Ultimately, focusing solely on something being fun, whilst obviously fine if it's something short term you're doing and not really planning to do forever, in the long run it ends up really hampering your enjoyment of it. The obvious example here being that the lack of a solid defensive receiver and general team cohesion caused Jozenji to lose this game, much to the frustration at the end of the match because they wanted to stay on the court longer. If they were more willing to do the supposedly boring work, they would have potentially been able to win more games, and therefore have more fun. But there's something those of you with a grey memory might be wondering about, and that's that Jozenji spent over half their practice time in 2v2 games. As a result, they learned how to do everything by themselves, including receives. So surely they did practice receives. Well, technically yes, but it's noted by their coach that they see receives as something that they're just going to have to do. As long as they get it up in the air, they don't particularly concern themselves with the quality of the receive, as after all, it's not what appeals to them. Their 2v2 training mostly just ended up benefiting their offense. Everyone is constantly looking for a way to attack or setting up one because they're used to having to do that. But surely they should also be used to defending all by themselves. They would have surely spent just as much time doing that. So why wasn't everyone great at receiving too? Well, simply because they just weren't as interested in that half of their training. But the reverse is true too. They weren't as interested in their receives because they weren't particularly good at them yet. I realized a while back, a lot of the things I wasn't interested in, I simply wasn't good at or didn't know much about. So to use Hinata as an example, he didn't really have any interest in receives initially, but once he began to make a little bit of progress in them and began to really appreciate all the little details that goes into making one, they started to really excite him, to the point where he was seen to be more excited about being the ball boy than even doing spiking drills. You have to make that little bit of progress for things to start to get interesting. And speaking of Hinata, it's this game where he seems to realize exactly that. Kageyama gets subbed off due to tanking a spike to the face, and immediately after, Hinata is also subbed off, as without Kageyama, there's not too much reason to keep him out there. And he's not oblivious to this at all. However, his response once he's on the bench isn't one of being disheartened, but instead, I want to play lots, and I want to practice lots. I have a lot I need to do. Immediately realizing his time on the court, his fun, would continue to be limited if he wasn't willing to practice what he previously didn't consider as fun as spiking. It does take him a couple seasons to really start doing so, but do remember that in terms of actual time, those two seasons were pretty close together. As the game moves into its second set, Krasno starts to really pull ahead, and Jozenji's fun starts to come to an end. Desperate to have fun again, their only plan is to get even more hyped up, to try even harder to have fun. But their ex-captain once asked them, there'll come a time when things aren't fun anymore, and what will you do then? Their response being, we'll just try even harder to have fun. But it doesn't really work that way. A great example, which definitely isn't a coincidence, is Daichi. Imagine if when the club was downhill and he was struggling to find a way to enjoy it, his response was, well, whatever, I'm just gonna keep having fun. It not only probably wouldn't have worked, i.e. he wouldn't have really enjoyed it, but eventually he would have had that realization that his time in school is about to end and he's wasted the opportunity he had in his third year to go with these talented newcomers to nationals. Not only did he end up seeming to enjoy the training he did, but now he gets the fun of playing with his team and winning loads of matches. Not to mention, there's really nothing boring about the way he plays. But anyway, when what used to be fun isn't anymore, often the way around it isn't to try and have more fun, but to do the boring until it becomes fun, which is their manager's last words to them before they step out on the pitch. Stick with the hard times so you can keep having fun. As following this, Jozenji step back on the court and are noticeably different. They've reached a much better middle ground. Just because you're having fun doesn't mean you can't think about what you're doing. By combining their wild play style with a little bit of calm, diligent thinking, not only do they do much better, but they find it's even more fun than before. And in a very similar fashion to Hinata later on, their captain suddenly realizes the excitement of this side of the game he never really appreciated before. Jozenji do still end up losing this match, and whether they realize this all a bit too late. It's frustrating that the time has come to an end so soon, but their managers are pretty happy about it. Here, at the very end, they've become a brilliant team. Between recognizing that there's times where trying to go too fast can actually slow you down, and accepting that sometimes things are gonna be boring, but pushing through that lets you get to the fun part, I've been able to get a much better balance in my life than I ever have before. Of course, where's best for everyone on that spectrum is going to vary a lot. There's a little part I left out earlier when Jozenji's coach talks about how they just try to get the ball up. He also mentions that it actually works really well for them. Unfortunately, I can't really help you out with that part. It's something you're just gonna have to try and test out yourself and see what works best for you. But, just be honest with yourself about it. If you name your top 5 favorite series, there's a pretty good chance in at least a couple of them there was that side character or even a villain that outshined the main character, so that even when the beloved main characters win, you still feel that slight sadness and sympathy for the defeated, as they had their own journeys too, after all. But there was one moment that went beyond just sympathy. As much as I loved Karasuno and could resonate with so many of the characters on such a deep level, there was a moment where I realized I was rooting for the man fighting against them. A man fighting against his own weaknesses, against the unfairness of the world, against a reality that seemed to be screaming at him that he was born to lose. A man named Oikawa.
白鳥沢に勝てないのに余裕なんかあるわけない。
影山入ってみろ。
けど俺負け取るに足らないこのプライド絶対に覚えておけよ。
We're first introduced to Oikawa very early on when Krasner has their first practice match against Albert Josai. And he's introduced as this guy who has everything. He's a top level athlete, he's charismatic, the girls are all over him. And initially that's kind of all he is as a character, more of an archetype than anything else. And so I'm sure I'm not alone in this, that I initially didn't think too much of him. But as the show goes on, we find out behind his bright, charming exterior, he feels the complete opposite way. He's filled to the brim with insecurity and envy towards those he sees as being above him, specifically Ushiwaka, the player he could never beat, and Kageyama, the genius overtaking him. In his eyes, He was born without something, and those two have that something and will always beat him as a result. It's a feeling we've all experienced because the cold truth is, not everyone is born equal. It is what it is, and I used to hate that, but Oikawa showed me a completely different view on it, and I can honestly say that once I finished reading Haikyuu and Oikawa's story, it never bothered me again. Anyway, going into the practice match, Oikawa shows up extremely late at the start of set 3. Apparently he got injured beforehand, so the coach asked him to warm up more thoroughly than usual, but he very coincidentally is ready to play right when Krasno are 1 point off winning, and then actually waits for Aoba Josai to have the serve again. And I can't help but think that part of him was worried he'd see a Kageyama that had already caught him, and so he wanted to observe and see if that was the case first. When he does come on, he scores 2 consecutive service aces against Tsukishima before Krasno changes their lineup, and it's immediately clear that he is way above anything Krasno have faced before. Tsukishima manages to receive the 3rd serve, and when Hinata goes up to hit the ball, we see a very interesting reaction from Oikawa. He's shocked, so shocked that the ball just flies past him without a response. Of course, we do see throughout the series that no matter how many times people see Hinata from the sidelines, the first time they see his attack up close, it's a totally different experience. But again, I think there's more to it. I think in Hinata, he once again saw someone given a gift he could never obtain. And we do see that Oikawa hates it whenever Hinata is subbed onto the court throughout the series. Anyway, Krasno win the game, but when they walk outside, Oikawa is waiting for them, challenging Kageyama and declaring he'll beat them the next time the two teams play. Kageyama doesn't really say anything back, and as Oikawa leaves, he comments on how they don't have long until the tournament starts, and their receives still need work. Following this, we don't see him again until the tournament, where Krasno watches him from the sidelines as he rattles off multiple service aces. Aoba Josai win their match, and so it's decided. The next game will be Aoba Josai versus Krasno. The teams prepare themselves for tomorrow and go home. Later that night, we see a single player, alone in a very dark room. Eyes glued to the screen, Oikawa is watching Krasno's match against Daytech, looking for any possible advantage he could get, any insight to beating Kageyama he could find. And as we soon find out, he realized something. The next day arrives, and it's finally time for the big match. As the two teams line up, Oikawa taunts Kageyama, asking him not to make it too easy to beat him in public, because he's been looking forward to this. Kageyama's response: "We'll win this time too." The crowds cheer, the coaches give their speeches, and the players get ready. To most of the spectators, it just looks like a normal volleyball match, but the players on the court know this one is different. No one's going to die on this court, and yet it feels as though the players are staking their lives on it. The whistle blows, and the first serve is sent over, and Oikawa is as level-headed as can be, getting the first couple points with some very clever mind games. It very quickly becomes clear this is going to be tough. Krasno won the previous practice match, despite Hinata crashing into everyone in set 1 and missing 2 of their best players in Nishinoya and Asahi. With all those issues fixed, this should, on paper, be a pretty easy win for them. But one player alone has turned Aoba Josai into something else entirely: Oikawa. But the reality is, no matter how much time you put into practicing something and skilled you've become, there's always someone out there who can match it. And with a single play, Kageyama proves it. Just like Oikawa asked, he is not going to make this easy. Oikawa finds out that Nishinoya can receive his serves too. Krasno's libero later comments on the timeout that Oikawa's serve used to go out of bounds most of the time. This monster, who seems to be filled to the brim with talent, didn't used to be much of a monster. He must have practiced like crazy to get to where he is. It's during the same timeout that Krasno realize Oikawa's caught onto their verbal signs, with Hinata using bring or give depending on the attack they were using. Kageyama is starting to panic a bit, and the gap between the two teams continues to widen. Oikawa then comments on how, in his eyes, a good setter is someone who can get 100% out of all of his hitters, which makes perfect sense that this is his playstyle because we know he has this real inferiority complex where he can't help but see everything he doesn't have whenever he looks at another player. Whilst he hates to see that on the opposing team, when it's his teammates, they become weapons to use. By comparison, the overwhelmingly talented Kageyama has a habit of looking at his teammates and not understanding why they don't play the way he wants. For example, the way he responded to Kunami's way of conserving energy, or Tsukishima's own unique thought process. But right now, he's trying to do way too much himself, and it simply isn't working. Alba Josei have a huge lead. It's all going Oikawa's way. All his hard work is paying off, and yet, when Kageyama and Oikawa go for a joust, and Oikawa finally knocks off the king's crown, his expression is not one of joy, not at all. You can tell he's been waiting for this moment for a long time, but it doesn't look like the face of someone who feels like he's won. And there's a reason for that we'll come back to. Ukai then substitutes Kageyama off to let him calm down a bit. Alba Josei then go on to win the first set. But with Sugawara now setting, the second set is quite evenly matched for a bit, but Oikawa eventually manages to pull Alba Josei ahead. And as a much calmer Kageyama subs in, we get our first real look at Oikawa's past. Iwazumi is the one narrating it and talks about how, from his view, Oikawa is gifted with talent. He's a natural athlete and his skills are way above most middle school players. He even won an award for being the best setter in the previous tournament they played. But as amazing as he is, the world is a very big place. There was one player he just couldn't beat, Wakatoshi Ushiwaka, the super ace of Shiratorizawa. In the 3 years they played against him, they never took even a single set off him. Despite doing everything he could, Ushiwaka was a wall he simply couldn't break. Not just that, Kageyama showed up shortly afterwards, a player 2 years younger than him, but it was immediately apparent that his potential and skill were simply unmatched. And as we find out later, Kageyama has dedicated his whole life to volleyball, ever since 2nd grade. There's a line by Hinata where he says, "On the days I wanted to play a game or go out with friends, Kageyama was playing volleyball. Before he even set eyes on a ball, he's been playing volleyball every single day." But Oikawa didn't know this. He just thought Kageyama was born with something ridiculous. But even if he was aware of how hard Kageyama had worked, it likely wouldn't have changed anything. All he knew was that this genius was going to catch him one day. The panic sets in, he practiced way beyond the point of overwork, and as such his plays became horrendously unreliable, to the point where in his next match, he was substituted out for Kageyama. It seemed as though Oikawa, despite all his work, was simply fated to live in the shadow of these two. And yet, to everyone else, including Kageyama, and as we later find out, Ushiwaka too, they all saw him as incredible. He was the only one who didn't see it that way. Later on, Kageyama, in his admiration for Oikawa, and not knowing the awful, dark thoughts inside his head, innocently asked him for advice. Oikawa's desperation and fear explodes in rage, and he almost ends his career very early on. Iwazumi asks Kageyama to leave, and then tells Oikawa he was only subbed off so he'd calm down a bit, and that he should have more confidence in himself. But Oikawa bursts into a frenzied rant about how he's still not good enough to beat Shiratorizawa, how he can't win, how he can't go to nationals. Iwazumi reminds him that this is a team sport. Sure, they don't have a single player that can match Ushiwaka one-on-one, but there are 6 players on the court. A single prodigy can't decide the match on his own. It's the 6 who are stronger that win. Oikawa suddenly feels invincible. To quote Hoshumi, who lacked far more than Oikawa ever did, "We are not limited to one way of being great." Sure, he can never play the same way Ushiwaka does, or Kageyama does, or Miyatsumu does, but he doesn't need to. He has a very different talent to get the most out of his teammates. If there are those with gifts you don't have, find yours, or rather, discover yours, because as we'll come back to, talent is something you can bloom. Following this conversation, he goes back to his usual self. In fact, he's better than ever, and with this new look on himself and volleyball, he finally takes a set off Ushiwaka. Although he loses this match, he's found a new light at the end of the tunnel, a whole new skill set for him to work on, and he vows to beat Shiratorizawa and Kageyama in high school. Going back to the match, it's Karasuno's set point, and the spectators comment on how Oikawa has surely got to go for a safe serve here, with how risky his usually are. But Iwazumi tells him to smash it, and Oikawa looks weirdly sad. To me, it's a reaction of, you don't have to tell me that. I already knew. I don't have the luxury of playing it safe against people like Kageyama. He not only hits it just as hard, but aims right for the corner. The guts to do that is noticed by Nishinoya. When the chance ball comes back, the usual play here would be a quick through the middle, but Kageyama calculates that, despite that, when Oikawa's back is against the wall, he'll go for the one he trusts most, Iwazumi. With their block in the right place, Karasuno take the second set, and Oikawa realizes that Kageyama accounted for his trust in his teammate. And not only does that make him a dangerous enemy, it gives him a tool to use against Kageyama. The following set plays out pretty evenly, but Alba Josei has the slight lead throughout. But when they're at match point, Karasuno finally catch them, beginning a long deuce, a grueling back and forth, with neither team able to break the deadlock. And the score ends up at 31-31, with both teams exhausted. Kunami gets a point through, and Alba Josei are once again at match point. But Oikawa just looks sad, with a line that perfectly summarizes what's going on in his head. Tobio, you've changed so quickly and suddenly. Someday, I just might lose to you. But to be honest, with the expression on his face, I think he's convinced himself that it's certain that there's simply nothing he can do to stop Kageyama catching him. No matter how hard he works, Kageyama is eventually going to overtake him. But in this final play, in the same way Kageyama knew, Oikawa would set to Iwazumi at the end of set 2. Oikawa knew Kageyama would set to Hinata here. Kageyama's strongest weapon, Hinata, is blocked. The ball falls to the ground, and Alba Josei win the match. Oikawa beat Kageyama just like he wanted, but again, he does not have the look of someone who's won. Instead, to him it's more as though he's delayed the inevitable. In his mind, he'll still lose to Kageyama, just not yet. Regardless, with Alba Josei's victory, they'd advance to the next round, and continue to win until it's finally time for him to face Ushiwaka again. He's learned and practiced so much. He's waited years for the chance to get revenge, and he's trained relentlessly to do so. And yet, once again, this scene always gives me a horrible feeling, as though the universe, fate, whatever you want to call it, was telling him, look at all you're not and cannot be, the strength you lack, the height you were born without, the power you're missing. Watch it crush you. Your tactics, your teamwork, your strategy, nothing will save you. You can't beat this guy. He did everything he could, and Ushiwaka beat him once again. So just what did he have to do to beat this guy? No matter how hard he trains, Ushiwaka just always seems to be that one step ahead. Is it even possible to catch him? Well, we don't find this out until the rematch with Karasuno, but it turns out after this match, Oikawa spoke to a mysterious figure for some advice, whose identity is revealed much later on in the series, but for now I'll just say that this guy seriously knows what he's talking about. Oikawa went to him claiming he wasn't sure if he wanted to carry on with volleyball. Evidently he just couldn't see a way to ever make it to the heights he wanted to, a way to beat Ushiwaka. But his mentor sees right through him and responds brilliantly with a bit of advice that fills me with courage and inspiration every single time. Are you really sure you know the limit of your abilities? You haven't finished growing physically or mentally. You haven't mastered every skill you can. You've still got room to grow. And it's laughably obvious when it's written down like that, but no, of course we don't. We don't know how good we can become. Unless there's some professional athlete listening who's been training for 20 to 30 years, you, as in you listening, have not hit the limit of your abilities. Do you really think you can't get any better at all? It all links in beautifully with what Kita says later on in the series, that we are nothing more than the sum of our habits. Those people you look at as being more talented than you, they very well may be, but they also, truthfully, probably do far more than you. They do things you're not even considering at the moment. He sums this up by saying, what we do on a scale of 1 to 10, they do on a scale of 1 to 20, or even A to Z. There's always something you can improve on. Of course, you can only practice so much in a day, but it could be figuring out how to use that time more effectively. As Kita says, a denser or more effective 1 to 10. If you're going to complain that someone born with more talent than you will always be better than you, they will. Until you've done absolutely everything possible, you can't complain about that. If you're not going to put in just as much effort as they do, you're obviously never going to catch them. What I've noticed in myself is when I don't feel as though I'm as good at something, I subconsciously don't end up putting as much effort in. It's an easy trap to fall into, as it can be kind of hard to see the merit of really putting in the work when you're convinced it won't work out. And that difference in belief often results in a difference in intensity. So can I guarantee it'll work out? Well, no, because by the same logic, other people can do just as well as you. I can't promise you at all you'll become number one in the world, because if it's possible for you to do it, it's possible for other people to as well. The only thing I can guarantee you is that if you don't try, you never will. It could take years, it could take decades to try and catch these monsters. It is a long, tough path, much tougher than throwing up your hands and claiming, I'm not gifted, so it doesn't matter. But if you can find the courage and resilience to follow that path regardless, that alone makes you just as terrifying as the monsters you're chasing. It's a completely realistic, grounded view on the world, and yet it feels so optimistic. And we see the difference this made on Oikawa's mindset in a number of small moments in the rematch. And so moving ahead to the next tournament, it's finally time. Both teams make it through to the semi-final, and Karasuno will once again play Aoba Josai. But this time the look on his face is totally different. Oikawa is here to win. His first serve is received by Daichi, and following this he's quite quiet for a lot of the first set. But when he gets his second serve, his mentor was right. He had not hit the limit of his abilities at all. That serve that Karasuno had a nightmare dealing with last time, that was effectively the reason they won, that serve had gotten even better. This one was out, but the power behind it is enough to concern even Daichi. Aoba Josai lose the first set following this, but Oikawa is in top form in set 2, using their new player Mad Dog perfectly, hitting his best serves yet, and Daichi ends up thinking something very relevant to Oikawa's story. In particular, what I was talking about a minute ago. Both teams are here to win. Both teams have practiced like crazy. A truth that is both natural and utterly terrifying. Aoba Josai inched closer towards the second set, causing Ukai to respond with one of my favourite scenes in the series, with Yamaguchi being subbed in, which I've made a video on, I'll link below to watch afterwards. But despite his best efforts, Oikawa's serve and sets give Aoba Josai the second set. The final set of the last showdown between these two teams plays out fairly evenly. And one thing I've really noticed about Oikawa in this set is whenever Kageyama or Hinata pull off something crazy, it doesn't seem to bother him nearly as much as it would have last time. The score ends up at 23-22 to Aoba Josai, and it's Oikawa's turn to serve. And that monstrous serve that went out of bounds last time, this time it's in. Aoba Josai are at match point. Oikawa is one serve away from taking out Kageyama again. From Karasuno's point of view, there's nothing and no one scarier than Oikawa is right now. Karasuno tried to calm themselves, but Oikawa goes for the kill. Daichi's years of receiving ridiculous serves just about allows him to get the ball in the air, and Karasuno claw back a point. It's still match point, but Hinata manages to block Mad Dog to bring them to a deuce. And now, the pressure seems to be getting to Oikawa again. He thought he'd finally done it. He thought he'd finally managed to take down Kageyama, and yet in the next rally, it starts with Sugawara's serve, Albajosai's counterattack doesn't make it through, and Kageyama has all his best bikers available. Oikawa tries to stay calm and figure out who it's going to, but Kageyama simply tips the ball over for a dump, and for a moment, everything Oikawa had built up collapses. Despite everything he'd learned, his change in mindset, his practice, it's still damn tough to see those geniuses right in front of you, to see that gap between you and them and not feel frustrated. Would he ever be able to overcome them? It's at this point that the show gives us that flashback we spoke about earlier, and after reminding himself of that, Oikawa has just one answer. In the first match he fought, even if I win today, I'll lose to you eventually. Whereas now, it's simply, I won't lose. Whether that's today, the future, or both, who knows? But as Oikawa says, today could be the day to let your talents bloom. Or tomorrow, or next year, or maybe once you're 30. But all I know for sure is if you don't believe that day will come, it never will. And I don't think I'd ever even considered the idea of talents blooming until I saw the scene, but is there really any reason your talents can only show up on day one? In the same way Oikawa's serves started off inaccurate, but once he mastered control over them, his talent for serving bloomed. The same way Hinata's talent as a decoy bloomed despite it not immediately being apparent, and despite all his disadvantages. And so, the match resumes. Sugawara's precise serve drops Iwazumi to a knee. Mad Dog Spike is received by Tanaka. The ball is set to Asahi, who smashes it down, and Hanamaki's receive goes very wide. Karasuno yell out that it's a chance ball, but Oikawa sets a fast, precise set from outside the court to the opposite end. Albajosai's coach silently thinks on how even he'd underestimated Oikawa. It seems as though his talent as a player had finally bloomed, and the symbolism on this whole play here is fantastic. Even when forced off the court by his opponents, whether that's Karasuno in this play or Shirato Ozawa when they beat him, he's still gonna come back. He gets up, he slips, he falls, and you could argue that's unfair that table's there, but he just continues to get up and keep going in spite of that unfairness. Not only was his set perfect, Iwazumi knew Oikawa could do it and was waiting there to spike it. Daichi's receive goes wide, Tanaka digs it out, Asahi hits it from the back row. The rally just doesn't seem to end. It's a relentless back and forth between the two teams, with just about every player on the court hitting the ball at some point. But this match was only ever going to end one way: the freak attack of Karasuno against everything Oikawa's built up. And in the past he feared Kageyama, he even feared Hinata at times, but now the only thought in his head is, come at me with your strongest weapon, I'll crush it myself. As the set goes up, he spots the gap in his own team's block, and knowing Hinata will avoid it, he shifts to receive it. But in spite of doing everything right, he still lost. Kageyama seems to have finally caught him. Karasuno erupt in celebration, and there's a million things that could have been going through his head at this moment. That he'd never get his showdown with Ushiwaka, that Kageyama would only continue to get better, that he simply wouldn't make it when it comes to volleyball. And yet, the only thing on his mind is soon revealed. Albajosai say their thank yous and walk off the court. Oikawa leads his team like a true captain to the very end. And on Karasuno's side, Daichi and Hinata both reflect on how Oikawa read Hinata's moves perfectly at the end. without that deflection, he probably would have got it. There's an uneasy feeling amongst them. Aoba Josai was beaten. They would never have to face them and their captain's nightmare of a serve again. And yet, it doesn't feel as though Oikawa has lost yet. And as he leaves, he runs into that final wall again in one of my favourite scenes of all time. Ushiwaka warns him that he lost because he chose the wrong path, that there was a place where his talents could have shone brighter. But instead, Oikawa chose his petty pride. Evidently, Oikawa was offered a place at Shiratorizawa, but turned it down. And there's two clear reasons for that. Firstly, the whole style of just give the ball to Ushiwaka is the polar opposite of how Oikawa likes to play. And I think it's for the best that he didn't go there, because it would have really stifled his growth. Secondly, he wanted to beat Ushiwaka. To most people, something like that would be silly. It would be petty. They wouldn't understand the need to try and prove yourself in that way. And they probably wouldn't have thought it was doable anyway. We'd seen how many times Oikawa had lost him already. But evidently, he believed he could. That belief may have been beaten out of him brutally, but it's back and stronger than ever as he tells Ushiwaka, "I've never regretted my choice, and I likely never will. But above all, nothing is over yet. Nothing. Not my volleyball career or my petty pride. Never forget that. Ever." Ushiwaka came here to warn Oikawa, and Oikawa wants him back. That long, tough path his mentor warned him he'd have to take to beat Ushiwaka, Oikawa is going to walk it, however long it takes. Not only that, he has full belief that he will win in the end, that even a giant like Ushiwaka can be taken down. No wall is insurmountable, no team is guaranteed to win. And so he gives Ushiwaka one more warning, that his junior who's nowhere near as good as him, which is on its own a great line. Despite losing that match, he no longer thinks Kageyama is going to catch him. But Oikawa also truly thinks that Kageyama and his team, they could beat even Ushiwaka. Oikawa's whole playstyle of getting the most out of his team has no limits. One day, it will even beat Ushiwaka. For now, he simply walks away. You might not have seen this next scene before. It's not in the manga or anime. Instead, it's exclusively in the recap film, but I think it's worth including here. Aoba Josai walk home from the defeat, or at least they tried to walk home, before they realized that they were back at their old training grounds. Looks like their volleyball careers really weren't over just yet. And as they pack up after their final training session, Oikawa thanks his team for the last 3 years. But that's not the important part. We then see Oikawa and Iwazumi actually walking home this time, in silence. And you know, despite Oikawa's enthusiasm, the facts are still the facts. He's never beaten Ushiwaka, and the Japanese national coach is looking to change the idea that the Japanese team falls before power and strength. And so what place is there for Oikawa, who did exactly that? At the moment, the team consists of those with that power and height, those who'd learned to fight in spite of lacking it, and those with simply pure, overwhelming skill. Oikawa might fit into that last category, but to outcompete Miya Atsumu, Kageyama, and who knows who else is going to be an insanely difficult task. He ends his high school career with 0 appearances at nationals and 0 interest from the national team. So what route would he have to take in order to manage that? The magnitude of the journey ahead is surely starting to dawn on him. But Iwazumi knows him better than anyone and says, "You're always going to be that guy chasing volleyball. No matter what you win, you'll always be chasing higher. But keep going without a second thought. Because you're the greatest setter there is." This isn't the last we see of Oikawa, however the next time we see him does start to go into spoiler territory. This won't contain any spoilers from Karasuno's time at Nationals, as Oikawa wasn't there, but it will contain spoilers for where he, Hinata, Kageyama, Ushiwaka, etc. all end up after graduating, and the ending of Haikyuu as a whole, so it's entirely up to you if you want to keep watching or not. If not, thank you very much for watching this far. I've got plenty of other Haikyuu videos without spoilers if you want to watch more. Okay, so after graduating, Hinata Shoyo, another player who evidently received no invitations to Japan's national training camps, moved to Brazil to train in beach volleyball. It's a pretty crazy leap of faith from him to move to a whole other country in order to work his way up to be a pro. And it's here that he runs into a player on a very similar journey to him, Oikawa. We shortly find out that he's a professional player in the Argentinian league, which, I mean, that on its own is pretty incredible. It already sounds like all that faith and hard work has paid off. I already thought this was a brilliant resolution to his story and was very happy for him. But of course, it's still not the end of it. Him and Hinata sit down for dinner, they have a chat and a good laugh, and then Hinata asks him why he's in Argentina. He then reveals that the shadowy figure in his previous backstory was Jose Blanco, Argentina's former national captain and setter, and he seems to have a lot in common with Oikawa. He watched one of his games when he was younger, and Blanco didn't stand out much, but instead got the most of his spikers around him. Now, Oikawa too is in Argentina, following in his footsteps, but he declares that the stage he'll play on hasn't changed one bit, i.e. the Olympics. But looking at these two, I couldn't help but notice that neither of them would be there without their idols, the Little Giant for Hinata and Blanco for Oikawa. Both of these players showed them that they can do it, that there's someone in the same situation as them who's come out on the other side just fine. Of course, we know the Little Giant didn't carry on with volleyball, but from what we've heard, he certainly could have if he wanted to. And regardless, Hinata found another inspiration in the form of Hoshiyume. Anyway, as I said earlier, the world is a big place. You might not have stumbled across them just yet, but I would bet for 99.9% of people, there's been someone in your exact situation before who's got through it just fine. Maybe you'll see them at some point the same way Hinata did. But even if Hinata hadn't seen Hoshiyume, he'd still be that short, successful volleyball player. He'd still be out there, and no doubt there's plenty of others we just never see. Having someone you look up to like that who's been in your shoes before really does make a difference. But even if you can't name anyone, that doesn't mean they're not out there somewhere. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the difference in belief resulting in a difference in intensity. Neither of those two would be in Brazil without their idols, and yet here they are. Even without those chance encounters they had when they were younger, they had the potential in them to make it here. The only thing that would have been missing is that difference in belief. You've just got to have that faith regardless that you'll be alright. And as I spoke about in one of my previous Hinata videos, things usually do work out fine. The pair play a match of beach volleyball together, and in a second match the following day. Then the two part ways. But whilst he was friendly towards him and enjoyed playing with Hinata, Oikawa hasn't forgotten that match before. He's every bit as determined to clear his list of people to beat, and Hinata is on that list too. And so after asking Hinata if he'll be back in Japan in a couple years, he gives him his final declaration. A line that makes me grin every time. I'm going to beat everyone. Be ready. And yet, that was the last we saw of him, at least for a long time. Years later, on the other side of the world, Hinata and Kageyama have their final showdown. And by the end of the penultimate chapter 401, we know the whereabouts of just about every character imaginable. And to be honest, with how incredible those chapters were, I kind of forgot about Oikawa's declaration. And as I said, I already felt pretty satisfied with where he ended up. The chapter ends with the 2020 Olympics being announced. We see Hinata and Kageyama together, ready to take on whoever their next opponents are. Opponents with a banner saying, "We got up against many odds and finally stood here." And so chapter 402 arrived, the end of everyone's journeys. Kageyama and Ushiwaka were no surprise, but Hinata too made it on Japan's Olympic team. And I was so excited and happy to see that. Little did I know, there was an even bigger surprise coming. Japan's next opponent is Argentina, who apparently have been performing fantastically. Argentina, led by Jose Blanco. And who else would their setter be?
これで一勝いっぱいだ。調子のんじゃねえぞ。取るに足らないこのプライド。絶対に覚えておけよ。でも戦う時は全力で倒す。
A decade on, a decade of hard work, of struggle and persistence, of failures and hardship, Oikawa stands on the Olympic court, ready to beat them all. And we never see the winner of this match, whether the protagonist gets his dream of a gold medal or our antagonist Oikawa gets his revenge. It initially remains unknown. It's said that Argentina won the last time these two teams played, but we don't know if Oikawa was on the team at the time. Given that the commentator says the biggest topic coming into this game is Argentina's starting setter and goes into detail about Oikawa's background, it makes me think this is his first appearance, because it goes into a similar level of detail as he does for Hinata. But the following spin-off chapter, 402.1, very subtly reveals who won that game. Karu has the ambition to set up a match full of old high school rivals, which of course includes Oikawa and Ushiwaka. Karu in his conman vibe has to try and convince these stars to join. And when he meets Oikawa, he says to him, "The whole country has been talking about you since the Olympics," which on its own isn't a confirmation of anything. It kind of hints that Oikawa won, but it's also equally possible that he just played extremely well but still lost. Although if he plays similarly to Blanco, we saw that Blanco didn't get as much talk as he maybe deserved. He was just quiet and walked off without fanfare. So it seems unlikely that Oikawa with a similar playstyle would get that much notice if he lost, right? But honestly, all of that is irrelevant. It's what Karu says to Ushiwaka that in my mind leaves no doubt as to who won. He tells Ushiwaka, "Oikawa and Hinata will play for the other team. Seems like a rare opportunity to crush both of them." Why would Ushiwaka need a chance to crush both of them? We know he won every game against him in middle school and high school, and has only ever played one game against him since, the Olympic game. That combined with Karu not telling Oikawa anything along the lines of, "This is your chance to finally beat Ushiwaka," or get revenge on Kageyama, only makes sense under one set of circumstances. He'd already done it. Oikawa beat everyone. Before I read this arc, I'd often run into that feeling of being behind in life, right? And I could never really shake it. But every time I find myself feeling that way, now all I have to do is remind myself of what I'm about to speak about. And I feel so at peace. You know, it's as though I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And it also has a lot of other very important reminders that we'll go through. So, final spoiler warning, I'm going to go into the context leading into this training arc. In Hinata's first year at high school, he and his team made it to the quarterfinals of the national tournament, where they played against Komomedai and most notably Hoshiumi, a player with the same height disadvantage as Hinata, but unlike Hinata, he's a national level player. With the score at 13 all in the final set, we get an insane rally with multiple back and forths that ends with Hinata nailing a shot from the back row. But as Karasuno's smallest crow tries to get up, he finds himself unable to even stand. He has a high-grade fever. He's still desperate to stand on the court, but Takeda, for his own good, refuses to let him. Before rushing him to the hospital, he leaves Hinata with my favourite line in the series, and one that I'll come back to repeatedly in this video. This is still volleyball. It's perhaps the cruelest fate imaginable for the one player more than anyone in that tournament who appreciates the joy of simply standing on the court. At 5'5", in a sport where 6'3" is short, you are and always will be small. You won't be given the same chance as other players. It's a truth you have to accept. And so you, more than anyone, must always be prepared at a moment's notice. Be the one who's always at the front of the line when opportunity knocks. In tears and apologizing to his team, Hinata is removed from the arena. That door closed on him for far from the first time in his life. Kenma comes down to greet him with an iPad to watch the remainder of the game, and he can only watch on as, despite their best efforts, his new rival ends Karasuno's summer run. They're not as disheartened or frustrated as you'd expect. Of course they are a bit, but to have made it to the national quarterfinals was a huge accomplishment to them. There's the sense that they all know just how well they've done. Daichi freely admits he didn't feel like it was a close game, despite the scoreline, and everyone is fine with that. Sugawara comments on how no one apologized for anything, no one is upset or beating themselves up, and they enjoy their final meal as a team together without a single sad face amongst them. But Hinata couldn't even be there for the last celebration. Whilst no one blamed him whatsoever, he felt as though he'd let his team and himself down. A few years on, Hinata is in Brazil, beginning my favourite training arc and one of my favourite arcs of all time. He went there to train in beach volleyball, the reason being that ever since he saw that 2v2 drills at the previous training camp, he decided that he needed to learn how to do everything. And in beach volleyball, with just 2 players as opposed to the 6 indoor, you're forced to do exactly that. Now, Japan does have beaches, of course, but neither old Ukai or Nekomata knew anyone that would be able to give him the level of practice he needs. Washijo, however, does. But they're not local. They're not even in Japan. They're in Rio, on the other side of the world. Hinata accepts without a second's hesitation exactly as Takada told him to. A year to prepare, then 2 to train. He won't let Kageyama ask him, "What have you been doing for the last 3 years?" a second time. Or at least, not in a negative way. And so he finds himself in Brazil. But his amazement and wonder very quickly fades. He meets his new place and his new roommate who doesn't want to talk to him at all. He plays his first match of beach volleyball and finds that his greatest weapon, his jumping power, has effectively been taken away from him. The whole thing clearly isn't going the way he'd hoped. He came here to catch up to professional level, and here he is flailing around on a beach. He's even losing to the people he's playing against. Not to mention how much time and energy too, of course, is being used up on his part-time job. Just what was he doing here? This wasn't the first time he'd been in a situation like this. He'd spent 3 years without a team to practice with, and he'd been the ball boy whilst everyone else improved right in front of him. And in both those cases, he'd had a moment where it hit him just how far behind he was, and how little progress he was making to change that. But this was on a far grander scale than either of those. Of course, he'd always taken the sport extremely seriously, but now he's on the other side of the planet living here. And now, whilst he's trying to make ends meet with his part-time job, his old teammate and rival Kageyama is already standing on the Olympic stage. But the thing is, and this is probably my favourite message in Haikyuu, both times, those seemingly awful situations ended up being extremely beneficial to him. The years he was denied simply being able to play the game etched into him a desire to hit every single ball that makes him a nightmare for blockers. The ball boy arc gave him the time and chance to develop his game sense in a way he simply never would have if he simply spent that time on the court, which then resulted in a beautiful receive against Inurazaki that he likely would have never made otherwise. At the time, there would have been no way to convince him that either of those situations were going to help him out in the long run, and yet they did. This would be no exception, as we do later on see the most beautiful, unexpected ways that it would not only benefit him, but allow him to do things that no one else was able to do. However, right now, he obviously doesn't know that, and simply has to have faith that it will. Much easier said than done. But ever since I've read Haikyuu, anytime I find myself feeling the same, I always remind myself of what happened after this arc. However, that's a long way off, and unfortunately his day only continues to get worse from there. In his job he finds himself lost, the customer yells at him for letting his food get cold, his wallet is stolen along with the cash he had in it, and that wallet was seemingly his last tie back to his family at home. A gift from his sister. His roommate continues to ignore him, and as he enters his room, it seems to hit him just how alone he is. He opens his phone, he sees his old teammates, and the homesickness completely overwhelms him. But this is still volleyball. No pursuit is ever just its good days. It's the days where it all seems hopeless, the days you wonder if it's even possible, the days that feel like this. And so Hinata realizes he doesn't have the time to feel this way for long, as after all, he who would climb the ladder must start at the bottom. Those were Takeda's words to him the last time he was in a situation like this, and ones that he has framed in his room. The ladder doesn't care how unfair the world's being, how frustrated you are, or how badly you want it. The ladder is simply a ladder. There are no shortcuts. But obviously the scary part is it never just looks like a ladder. It looks like setting, receiving, spiking, lifting weights, eating right, sleeping well. And so all these things he wants to do at a high level, he has to be willing to start off at the bottom, both on and off the court. And so he picks himself up, he cycles to the beach, and finds himself jumping into a match. No one on the court understands Japanese is yelling out, but he's clearly having a great time, despite this probably not being the most efficient practice in the world with the level of his opponents. However, whilst no one on the court understands him, when he turns around he sees Oikawa of all people, the player who gave him his first high school defeat. And yeah, I had the exact same reaction as Hinata here. However, the two have a lot in common. For one, neither received any attention from the Japanese team after high school, and so were forced to take a much more unconventional route. But secondly, and far more importantly, they both know that feeling of being born without. Although, it has to be said, Hinata far more so. Oikawa even seems to acknowledge this during his big moment at the end of Season 2, where he says, height may be the deal breaker, obviously being the one thing you simply cannot change. Now, obviously all the Oikawa stuff I've gone through in this video, so I won't repeat it all here. Instead, I'm going to jump ahead to after they've had their meal and catch up, and then return to the beach to play and match together. Despite some initial struggles, Oikawa quickly gets to grips with it. Hinata, being in much higher spirits, then proceeds to manage to get a conversation going with his roommate through their shared love of One Piece. He and Oikawa play a final game of beach volleyball together where he gives Hinata some advice I'll come back to later. But it's yet another instance of, if I hadn't gone through that seemingly awful situation, I would have never have experienced or learned that. It doesn't seem like he knew these matches were going to be here. I think he just went to the beach after the horror day he had because he felt like he had to do something. And so all these little things like his wallet being stolen, so by fate, caused him to be at the perfect spot at the perfect time. And I think it's a bit of advice in particular about bearing in mind how your opponents see you that really allow Hinata to reach the heights he does later. The pair end up winning the match and then parting ways, and we get a beautiful montage double spread of everything Hinata's going through that leads super well into the next big point. Of course, we see him practicing volleyball and lifting weights, but there's just as much focus on him sleeping, him eating, and even doing things like yoga. Of course, these do all help with the sport, but there's something far more important than that. As commented on by his mentor Kato, he says when he looks at Hinata, he can tell that Hinata recognizes something. I've really learned to accept myself. It's not a given for you to be okay, for everything to be alright, but he still trains, he practices, he disciplines himself, working until being okay has become a habit. I've spoken in a different video about how Haikyuu shows the importance of taking care of yourself first and then everything else second. But often when someone says taking care of yourself, our first reaction is, bubble baths and teas and lazy days. And I'm not saying that's wrong if it works for you, but for me it simply never did. For me, taking care of myself is exactly what Hinata's doing. Taking care of your body through exercise, eating well, and even things like yoga and stretches, which I admittedly probably don't do that last part as often as I should. And I really do believe all of these things should come before anything else. Hinata even says if he had to choose between food and training, he would choose the food. And yeah, of course that shouldn't be an either or situation. If possible, you want to do both. But the taking care of yourself is not only the more important part, It will also help with whatever it is you're pursuing significantly. I've always found the hour or so I spend taking care of myself enables me to spend the next few hours working on whatever I need to far more efficiently. The overall work I get done is way higher. We find out later on that 2 of the top 3 hitters in Japan take this to an extreme. Well, Sakura takes it to a crazy extreme with, standing in the corner of the room with a mask on. But Ushiwaka also takes it very, very seriously. And no doubt, the third also takes it very seriously too. And of course, as Hinata found out, neglecting it will eventually catch up to you. He wasn't sleeping or eating as much as he should have, and he inevitably paid the price for it. But none of this is to say that simply doing all that will always make you feel okay mentally or physically 100% of the time. That isn't a given either. And something about that was actually a huge relief for me, because if you're ever in a situation where you've done everything but still feel sad or ill or whatever, it can lead you to think that you're either doing something wrong or there's something wrong with you. Sometimes you are just going to feel down, and it doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong, or black and guts as Ukai puts it. It's just something that happens. And I also love this part here about don't try to surpass your limits, work to push them higher. Anyway, going back to Brazil, Hinata plays out his final beach volleyball match of the circuit, and it actually ends in defeat, but he isn't discouraged in the slightest, because he already knows everyone is defeated at some point. It's what you push towards to become tomorrow that matters. And so, as Hinata's time in Brazil comes to a close, he continues to train, work, and take care of himself until those 2 years are finally up. It's time for him to say goodbye and return to Japan, where, as mentioned by Pedro, he's still a complete unknown. When he left to go to Brazil, he just wasn't at the level to go professional. But now, despite having such a rough start, the Ninja Shoujo is going to give trials a go. And we very suddenly see in the next chapter that not only did he succeed, but he's on an extremely good team, featuring the likes of Mia Atsumu and Bokuto, both considered absolute top players back in high school. Now, I'm not going to go through the entire match in this video, although I certainly will in a different one, but I do want to go through the parts I alluded to earlier, in particular, how his time in Brazil benefited him in ways that were completely unexpected to everyone. Across the other side of the net is equally packed with stars too, Kageyama and Ushiwaka, who are probably the 2 players Hinata found most intimidating, along with that player, Hoshiume. Hinata's debut apparently has him replacing a player over a foot taller than him, and so Ninja Shoujo sneaks onto the court with no one knowing what they were in store for. The first play of the game has Hinata receiving Kageyama's serve beautifully, and not only that, he stays on his feet to be ready to attack. It's later noted by Kageyama that Hinata's balance is just ridiculous. It's always been great, but training on the sand, that training that seemed crazy to most, and I'm sure Hinata had plenty of doubts about whether it would ever pay off at times, that training turned Hinata into a monster. Atsumu sets it to Hinata in the back row, who, in the same way Hoshiumi did at the end of their last match, Hinata starts this match in the exact same way. I'm here. Again, I'm not going to go for everything, but a few other small bits. They make a point that Romero is a world-class player, one that Hinata actually grew up watching. And yet that bit of advice Hinata got from Oikawa, you have to bear in mind how they see you, enabled even Hinata to catch him off guard. In the 2v2 environment of beach volleyball, for one player to be able to cover the whole court, even Hinata's otherworldly speed and reflexes aren't enough. He had to come up with strategies that he would have never have thought of in 6v6 games, or he may have thought of, but would have never polished to the level he has now. Living up to his reputation as a ninja, he acts as though he's firmly planted in one position before moving to a new one the moment the attacker looks away, making Romero think a dink was an easy point before moving exactly there to catch him. Just like a ninja, it's as though he's showing up out of nowhere, and much to Daichi and Kageyama's shock, who distinctly remember the airhead who only loved spiking. I doubt without his chance encounter with Oikawa, he would have spent as much time as he did in Brazil trying to develop this kind of playstyle. And I also doubt that if he had gone straight into the pros, he would have either. Because I think playing in these slightly lower stakes games where he could try all sorts of new things was perfect for him. I can see how if he tried this in a pro game and it didn't work, it'd be kind of hard to justify to his team, oh, I was intentionally standing miles away from where the ball was going. Trust me bro, it was intentional. But over here, where there isn't that same pressure, he was able to freely practice and refine his playstyle. That's not the only carryover either. There's float serves that looked insanely difficult to everyone else, but to Hinata it was just easier than the wind getting it. There's moments that go back to the ball boy arc over 5 years ago as well, like when Ushiwaka told him the thing on his mind when he receives is what he's doing for the next attack. Which, whilst I'm sure he was already implementing it, it kind of made me realize that when I look at my own life as well, sometimes things take years for you to see and understand why and how they benefited you, and it can be the strangest things as well. Speaking of Ushiwaka, right at the very end of the game, Hinata faces his immense pressure once again. Last time he was absolutely no match for those spikes, but he's practiced for this, and so he calms himself. Ushiwaka hits it, and Hinata stops it. He was perfectly positioned, but as Tanaka said, he didn't just happen to get it dead on, nor did he happen to make a perfect pass of it. It was the culmination of everything he'd been through. Everything he'd been working on this entire time, it was all still volleyball. In chapter 2, when Kageyama told him he wasted the last 3 years, he was angry and said it wasn't worthless. Although he really doubted that was true. But 2 chapters from the end of the series, he can say with certainty that it wasn't. Everything led him to this moment. Not one thing was worthless. Even a little balance drill he did using his feet in Brazil came in useful in the final rally to give Hinata the win over Kageyama. And wow, it's just such a beautiful arc. In 7 chapters there's so many little parts that connect to another 395, both before and after. So Saiko's line about how there are some flowers you only see when you take detours, Ukai's little reminders to always eat a proper meal, the way he made his team realize that you could try and go too fast to the point where it slows you down. But more than anything, this arc always reminds me that no matter how bad things may be right now, years from now, I'll see how it all connected to whatever brilliant place I'm in.